Well, good morning, everyone. This is the inaugural meeting of the Ocean Science Trust. It is 9:05 on Thursday, November 12th. I'm Chris Castelli with State Lands. Thank you all for coming. Just to let you know, the bathrooms are almost directly across the entryway from where we are now. You can cut through our break room and then head over there. There's a water fountain over there as well. Do we have anyone on the phone right now?
I have a message from.
Okay.
I have a message from
Emily?
Yeah, Emily Goodwin Martin, who has changed her name to Emily Goodwin Martin. She has a statement that she wants me to read on her behalf when it comes to the comments that she had a baby in the hospital earlier this week who was fine. And they're home, and everyone has the stomach flu, so she wasn't sure. She said if she needed to come in for a code, that I would text her, and she'd call it if a form was needed for any vote.
Do you need someone else to read it for you, Gabrielle?
I should say I'm going to have Casino. And if I could, Casino Lee is familiar to many of you because she was a legislative fellow for the Coastal Caucus in this past session. And she's now moved over to our side of the ledge, and she's going to be a policy fellow in the governor's office through February, and will be helping me with all the ocean portfolio. So.
And if you know anything about dredging.
Oh, dredging. All right.
Or shellfish testing.
Or shellfish, that's true.
So I'll just say a couple of words. I'm Stephanie Halleck. I am the interim director of DSL while they are recruiting for a permanent director, which I believe closes this week. I'm really happy to welcome you all here. And as you know, Chris has been working hard to make this a successful first meeting for you. And we're really glad to see the group come together and to be able to host you here. I think I don't have a lot of remarks to make, but maybe we could all just go around and make sure everybody knows everybody else. And then if anybody joins us on the phone, we can add in.
I'm Jim Sumich.
Okay.
Laura Anderson. We'll be talking more later, so we don't have to give too much by way of introduction, I presume. Okay.
Louise Holiday.
Christina Woliakowski.
I'm Sabrina Weeks.
Gabriella Goldfarb.
Chris Castelli.
And Arnie Ropeland.
Ed Bowles, head of Fish Side of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
I'm Dave Fox. I'm with the Marine Resources Program of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Paul Klein, the Oregon Coastal Management Program.
Christina Lay, Oregon Sea Range.
Lisa Derrick, Oregon Marine Reserve Partnership and the Pacific Marine and Estuarine Fish Habitat Partnership.
Great. So I will be with you for about an hour before I have to go do something else. But Senator, did you want to say
I would just say it's taken a while to get here. I'm thinking 5 years. Laura was one of the first people when I was. This has been really important to me since I got here. I was a marine biology student at the University of Washington a long time ago, and marine stuff has always been really important to me. And I moved to Coos Bay, and it stayed important. And OAMB there, a lot of friends, a lot of stuff. And the constant comment that I got from OAMB, the constant comment when I started to get up to Newport and find those people was, there's a lot of research to do, and there's a lot of ideas about how to go about doing that research from a lot of different people, but there isn't any money. And when I got in the legislature and really started looking at it, what we say we want and what we actually pay for are very different. And so having a consistent place to go and get money to do research, which I think is going to be essential for our state and the world, was really difficult. And we've done a little bit. Marine reserves caused a little bit of conversation on the coast for a while. And so that took everybody's efforts and everybody's interest for a long time to kind of figure out where we were going to be. It also gave me hope that there would be resources given to Fish and Wildlife and others to study the marine reserves. We put a little bit in at the beginning to get baseline data in and out, but it hasn't continued to be a focus. And so we brought together a work group 5 years ago. Laura was on it. She was one of the first people who a majority of people in the Newport area said, this is the person you should have on the committee. And I didn't know Laura at the time. And I said, why? And she said, well, when you get to know her, you'll know the history of it. You'll know how much she cares and why it's important for her in her business as well as everything else. And she's just one of the people in our community that people trust. And that was the biggest thing about putting together the work group, was getting people that fishermen and other people would trust, because the issue is not about research. People, including fishermen, like doing research, and OSU at the Hatfield has done a lot of good stuff to get fishermen as collectors of data and understanding what's going on. And I think it's starting to change the belief. But if you watch the nearshore, the conversations on the marine reserves, they didn't want to give up their information. I mean, it's proprietary. They know where they want to go. They didn't want to share, and yet they needed to share, or they were going to lose some of their prime habitat. So eventually, they worked out a way with third parties putting the data together and giving it out in sheets. And if you see the stuff we have now, it's pretty impressive for our coast, what we know about fishing and other kinds of stuff. But you need to have people who people could trust. Terry Thompson, been a legislator, was on that group. The people at OSU were there, and a number of other partners from different agencies. And we talked and hardened along and came up, and there's a copy of kind of our recommended long-term funding, whatever stuff that came out of that group. We started out the first time we got back, I always try to take more than I can. In my first attempts to have a conversation about this, I found out that politics is everywhere. I knew that as a high school principal. I didn't realize that the universities were as cutthroat about it as they are. But what happened is I started having these conversations about kind of a trust thing. And OSU said, well, you know, you're in my district, and I think OSU should manage this. And Oregon should manage this, and OMB and whatever. And then the people at Hatfield said, well, you know, we have a lot of information about actual using it, different than the pure science that they do down there. We do practical science here. And then Portland State said, you know, the biggest problem is invasive species. And I will tell you, that's the issue where they need to be, so we should have it. And I could get nowhere with anything. So that's when we had the big work group, had the conversations, tried to bite off a little bit more than we should have the first time, and that didn't go very well in the first grade. Then we broke it down into subparts, and we started getting some of our bills passed and started feeling a little better about it. But this one was always the hardest. There's a group of people who believe if you get funding from one group, they're going to pay for the research that they want. If you get funding from other people, we weren't going to trust that. And we're saying, no, what we're trying to do is get an organization that people can trust, that can collect resources from all the myriad of places, and then make decisions and prioritize what kind of research would be the most important for us. As I've always said to the people on the coast, what I would really like to identify is who is the canary in the mine out there. What's the species, what's the group that we should be looking at that will tell us the most, if we studied it, about the health and vitality of that place out there. And can we look back historically and find the information that will tell us what are the cycles that happen naturally? We've got this big blob out there about how often has that happened historically? What kind of information, how panicky do we need to get on these kinds of things? And then the Oyster Crash in 2007, another thing that happened when all of a sudden we were unable, because of ocean acidification, and it's pretty clear that was the cause. It was not known entirely at the time. But how do you make sure that species survive? And I'm really worried about species out in the natural environment, not necessarily the ones we put in the hatcheries. We figured out a way with the percolator and other kinds of things to make oyster larvae. But how are the critters doing that are out there in the natural resources? And so me is, what happens if we have a fall like we did in oysters in our hatcheries in the ocean in krill? Another species that has a problem it has to make some kind of a exoskeleton. So, because it's the big food for lots of breeders out there. And so how do we acknowledge it? How do we know it? How do we get the right money that we can at the stuff? Fish and Wildlife and their ocean division and their marine division, they work hard as they can to try to get resources to do that. But we haven't funded any of the science on ground or in the ocean that we should have, in my opinion. So this was an attempt to bring a group of people together who could be thoughtful about it, who had resources and were able to talk to foundations and others about investing in an organization whose sole purpose is to make sure that we understand our nearshore better, and that we start making decisions at the legislature based on information that's scientifically proven, as opposed to whatever the next fad is or whatever the next issue is, but try to get some research. I kept saying at the meetings that I thought it should be a little bit like the National Academy of Sciences for Oregon, having some kind of independent group who we could fund. And then We can get federal, we can get our state money, we could ask for federal money, we could ask for foundations. The goal was to figure out any way we can get any kind of money at all to start giving us the resources necessary that people who are doing that research will come to us. And at the end of the day, we'll have reputable science being done that is replicatable. And to me, that's the big issue. How do you make sure that the kinds of things you do, if somebody else went and followed up on it and did another experiment, used the same criteria that you were, would come up with similar answers? Because everybody wants the science to tell them what they wanted to hear, and that's the frustrating part of science in general. And we've had examples when people have done what they thought was the right thing. The biggest example for us on the coast has always been cleaning out all of our streams. When all the loggers and people who were out there said, "This is really stupid, guys. We've come here, we live here, we work here, we love being here as loggers, and we know where the fish come." And it's not at cleaned out parts of the rivers that you got to have spawning habitat. They cleaned them all out, and we lost years of fish production, natural fish production, because we didn't have a place for them to go and spawn. So I'm hopeful this will be a beginning of something that turns out to be a great thing, and I hope other states replicate it and do whatever. But for us, I just want to figure out that we have a better handle on what the nearshore is doing for us, because I think most Oregonians love to come and look at the beach. They really have no real understanding what's risks underneath the water. That's me. That's why I'm here. That's why it has been a passion in the 11 years that I have been in the legislature.
No, nothing more. I think you can probably just go into reviewing the statutory charge unless Gabrielle, can you say anything?
I'll just very much more briefly than I thought, which made me happy. Just croak out just acknowledgement of Senator Rogan's leadership on this, and it needs to take a while to find the right set of folks. But I think there's an amazing team of people who can do a lot for this state. And I think it will take a partnership of state funds, tech funds, private funds to uncover the key questions for the resources and have to be management relevant science. That's the purpose from what I gather, and certainly from our perspective, the results perspective, having an entity that's focused on helping our management agencies answer the questions and have the information they need that is actionable. So having an entity focused on that is special, and doing it in an Oregon way. There are other funding entities in other places that I know the Shore Resources Task Force looked at. But I'm excited about this group of people being able to craft something that fits an Oregon model for supporting our shore research. And I have some ideas about some priority areas which Senator Berglund has discussed, and happy to share those later on in the conversation.
Okay, trust members, your mission, should you choose to accept it, your duties, which I'm sure you guys have reviewed, and accepting this position is to promote peer-reviewed competitive research and monitoring that leads to increased knowledge and understanding of Oregon's ocean and coastal resources, promote innovative, collaborative, community-oriented, multi-institutional approaches to research and monitoring related to Oregon's ocean and coastal resources, enhance the state's capacity for peer-reviewed scientific ocean and coastal research, and, subject to available funding, establish and execute a competitive grant program to conduct research and monitoring related to Oregon's ocean and coastal resources. You are charged with meeting at least twice a year. You have rulemaking authority to adopt rules to carry out the duties of the trust. Let's see, and I believe one other thing we should note of particular importance was there was a requirement to submit a report to the Legislative Assembly by March 31st of each even-numbered year. So that would be coming up, describing the progress of the trust in carrying out its duties.
Chris, I can't remember if you discussed this, but one thing that might be helpful, and there are others at this table who know about this, is the understanding for everybody about public meeting requirements and what the what the board's, what is acceptable in terms of like meeting outside of a publicly noticed meeting.
Right, that is an excellent point. I think it is not on the agenda, but we did submit materials to you on both the ethics law and a quick reference guide to Oregon's public meetings law. And I assume a lot of you are probably familiar with this sort of material already. I noticed the email correspondence was very cordial and good. Basically, you want to try to not meet and discuss topics that the trust would be discussing outside of these meetings. It's okay to kind of discuss what should go on the agenda for the meetings, but you don't want to get sideways of sort of having a meeting outside of a published public meeting. And that goes for email correspondence. A lot of you, we all sort of have an email group where I'm sending most of the information. I've gotten some emails back from you, which is perfect. You can ask me any questions as staff. But if we get into a reply all, you want to be careful about not starting to discuss trust business over an email chain. It's not the end of the world if you do. We just need to come back to the meeting and have the exact same conversation that you had in the email chain. So
And they can meet by conference call.
They can, yes.
And subgroups of them could meet. So I think that's good. I understand if they wanted to work in subcommittees or subgroups.
They are themselves open meetings, so you can meet that way, but you need to make sure that there's a notice and people can be there if they want.
And do you notice that through the website, or how do you get the information out to the public if we're going to have a subcommittee meeting? Or...
Yes, we will do that. We set up, and certainly you're free to organize from this point forward however you wish, but in anticipation of this group meeting, we did set up a webpage for you at DSL's website, and we have a meetings page underneath that. So yes, please let us know. We need to, I believe we submit the public meetings notices to DAS, and then we place them on our website too.
They can do executive session
if they need to, yes.
Discuss outside of public.
Yes, there usually has to be a reason for that, and I can find some more material on that.
Yeah, reason that this one that'll be hard. I mean, if
Yes.
we're hiring some people, if we decide to buy the new shore, I mean, the exceptions for using executive session are pretty specific. So I can't see this having much.
And I'd also just remind everybody, a lot of you are, including me, are using private email for correspondence related to this. That is public email. So just keep that in mind, and you want to keep stuff related to the Ocean Science Trust in a separate file, because if there's ever a public records request, our emails are subject to that request, and so just think about that from day one, so you've got all those where you can get access to them and understand that they are public records.
Chris, do they all have a roster of everybody's contact information, and or can we provide that if they don't?
We do have we have an email roster of their contact information. We don't have all of your contact information. We got most of it together. We don't have your phone numbers per se at DSL. If you'd like to give it to us, you're welcome to. But yes, we do have the email addresses.
I meant for each other really more than for us.
Yes.
Contact. Is it possible to set up a separate email for us? I mean, because I really don't want to use my private email for state business.
That's a good question. Through the state, or I'm sure you can set one
like
up.
Find a domain like OregonOceanScienceTrust.org or something like that. You know, I mean, I do not want to use my.
So are you on Oregon State Mail? You're the Commissioner of Washington.
I'm on Oregon Commission Mail. I mean, Gorge Commission Mail.
Oh, so
we're official Washington.
Separate entity.
Yeah, and I'm doing this on my own time, so
right.
It's not part of the commission business.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm going to look at, if anybody else is interested, I'm happy to look into trying to find our own domain, but I really don't want to mix personal email with this.
So what I do would to create a Christina OST Gmail account. I mean, if you want to.
Could be a Gmail account, but I'll look for a domain. If you guys have our own domain.
And you guys can have your own domain. And then we could put your link. We could put a link to that.
As long as it's not OregonOceanScienceTrust.org. I really don't want to have to say that. Spell that out.
Type that in.
All right, well, I'll be in charge of looking.
Okay.
It really is interesting that way. I mean, having been in leadership at different times in the legislature, I get these requests for everything. So,
Right.
My emails are it's always there. And we're finding out more about what that really means through our previous governor's email stuff. So the courts are eventually going to determine exactly what that looks like. And the same is about open meetings law. Lane County has provided the opportunity for us to understand what meetings are meetings and what meetings aren't meetings. So it's getting to be clearer, but it's always been issues.
So Chris, could our latest person please say who you are for all of us?
I apologize for the right. I'm Gina Carter with the Nation Conservancy.
Well,
Really
she's
medical thing this morning, so for my grandma. So thank you.
I think we are on to organizing activities. We have a list of bullets here that we sort of
So,
came up
Chris,
with.
before we leave the statutory charge, I have a question. So, the Nearshore report recommended the creation of this body, but recommended it be created as a 501c3, sort of all of the cultural trust model.
Right.
But the legislation doesn't do that.
Right.
So, was there discussion around? I wasn't paying attention to the legislature. Was there discussion around that?
There was the original bills that we put in did do the 501c3 stuff and all that kind of stuff. And I think that when that failed, we came back with the next iteration of that, and
Okay.
it came to what we have today, which is one that people felt more comfortable with. There are people in the legislature who like government having some control with regard to this stuff, as opposed to, because then they feel like they have some extra internal control from the legislature. That was an ongoing conversation, and Betsy has her feelings, and other people in the Coastal Caucus. So what we have in this deal is the one that we could agree on to get through the legislature. And people feel sometimes about 501c3s that they can get off on their own and do exactly what they want, which they can. That's why they're a 501c3. And there was some real angst from some of the fishing community about, you can start getting only Pew money, and then you're just going to do what Pew wants, which they felt they were doing on the other stuff. And so I think we still have the opportunity to consider that and do it. I don't think the legislature said we couldn't. It just said that we're going to set it up and get it started the way it's in the statute right now.
Yeah, so where I'm headed with that question and conversation is, I think it will, not having a 501c3 status will limit
Us being able
our
to get the
sources
resources.
of revenue.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
I don't think we want to limit ourselves. And the cultural trust model is interesting because they were created in statute as a 501c3, but their budget still goes through the legislative process
Correct.
through Business Oregon. So there's a model there that still gives the legislature the ability to do a look-in to see what the organization is doing, but you don't limit yourself to the kinds of revenue that you can take in. So it's just something.
And I agree. And I think that's something
about.
as we get going, if we want to decide we can do it,
Yeah.
I think the legislature will be more understanding of that as a possibility.
Yeah.
In part because of the trust, and it's worked really well. So you have some other opportunities as well with respect to how you invest your money. Those kinds of things are different.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, it's
Because that was our
because I don't think
recommendation.
we're going to get foundation money in if we're not a 501c3. So that limits what
Yes.
That's right.
sources we can tap without that status. So we just need to think about it.
And that was a question you and I had a little
Yeah.
discussion about that.
Absolutely.
Would, if a foundation did want to give money, would DSL ask for limitation, or would the trust ask for limitation?
Correct. That's a good question.
So using the cultural trust model, it is Business Oregon who carries that budget and carries that water in the legislature for the cultural trust. Now, cultural trust staff may go to the legislature with the director of Business Oregon or their legislative person to do that, but this is the way I read the statute. It's similar to the cultural trust in that it's housed in an agency, and that's DSL. And DSL would carry the water in terms of making those requests. And Chris, I don't know if that's news to you, but that's the way I read the statute.
Yeah, well, it'd be new to me, but that's all right.
Yeah,
This is new to me too.
Yeah, the trust doesn't stand on its own. It's appointed by the land board, so it's part of the agency here. So.
And one concern with that is that right now, DSL out of its existing funds is providing a certain level of staffing support, but doesn't have the allocation of staff time to kind of do the full-blown staffing that probably that would entail. So,
well, and
glad you're at this table and
that's right. No, we understand.
Well, and hopefully over time there will be enough resources coming in to actually hire a part-time director who would take on that staffing responsibility.
Again, doing that is easier as a 501c3 than it is in the legislature.
Yes.
Fighting for it each year. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So just the structural questions might be one of the first things in terms of identifying what the trust can do in its current construct and what changes would need to happen.
Yeah, and I think that the legislature would be right to be upset if we just went off on our own and applied for 501c3 status.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to
And we have
get
another
an
example
understanding
right
of-
now that I'm on, which is the state fair.
Right.
Which is, we don't know exactly what it is.
Quasi-governmental, one of those quasi.
We keep asking that question for our attorneys and other
Yeah.
attorneys because, again, we can now take direct money from organizations to help with the fair, which the state parks could not do when they had it. So we're trying to make it a viable program, which it hasn't been for 150 years. But our goal is to do that, and we are in this really weird quasi-governmental agency status.
That does raise, you just raised another issue, which is if you need legal advice and the cost of that, and ultimately paying for that.
I've also, actually, because you have rulemaking authority, I didn't know who would be doing either the rulemaking or what division that would go under.
Yeah, so Chris, I think you need to assume that they're going to ultimately be DSL rules, a new division of rules for this trust, but it's going to be DSL who does it. And it's interesting, the legislation says the trust can do its own rulemaking, which makes the assumption we're adopting the rules this board is as opposed to the land board. And so
I think they have to be approved by the land board. In my opinion, would be
they have to be approved by the land board.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that.
Yeah,
but
it delegates the rulemaking to here, which I was a little surprised
you may
about.
adopt any rules.
Huh?
Yeah, it says you may adopt any.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Okay.
So just since we're discussing this stuff, I won't be around, and I didn't hear all the politics around this. At some point, maybe 2017 is too soon, depending on how this goes, should DSL be anticipating going in with some kind of policy option?
Yeah, I think we as a group should, over the next year, it'll be the 18th. There's no way I don't think we can get to anything before the 17th session. But during the 18th session, I think it would be good to ferret this out and look at exactly how we want it to do. Look at the 501c3 status, because the state can do that. I've never understood that. The rest of us have to file all these forms and get stuff back, but the state can say you can be within the context of the state. So we need to get that clarified and figure out how that works best as a group, and then go to DSL and say together we need to go to the legislature. And they can either put it through the executive branch into the legislature as a bill, or we can do it individually or as a committee bill. So that's a question that is a political question we can decide what's best to do.
Yes, I would note if there was an interest in trying to make changes in any kind of funding request through the executive branch, then it would wait until 19 unless we did something now for 17.
Yeah.
If there was a sense of including something in 17 in the budget development, which starts this spring.
That makes it more likely it will be a legislative ask if it's money in 17.
I did ask Chris, and Sabrina, I'll note it for you as well. I think it would be a good idea for the agency to track its costs as much as possible, especially if it's going to be an ask for 19. including if there's any DOJ or whatever, so we have an idea what it's costing to.
I agree.
Sounds good. We have a project number. We'll do that.
I'm assuming there was a fiscal that was put in for this bill that was fairly small.
No, there was a fiscal that we put in on. Would you mind?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Senate Bill 737. The department's role was flushed out further in the original Senate bill, and we wrote a fiscal that wasn't meant to be mean, but what we thought was realistic to the needs of the trust, and that sort of caused a little bit of what wasn't expected. So actually, our role, the department's, was pared down to get us to a minimal fiscal. So our role in the law is that we shall provide a facility and administrative support for the meetings of the trust as requested. Period.
There you are.
Yes.
Got it.
So we're actually fudging on that.
Just.
Okay.
Any other? I think we've sort of started into the organizing activities. I just wanted to make one note. As you look down the bullets, there's a discussion of the Compass letter. You received a letter from Compass. We also received a letter from Oregon Marine Reserves Partnership, which is in your packet too, so feel free to discuss as you'd like. And we probably forgot to mention there's coffee and some goodies over here.
Part of the budget.
How are the trust members doing? You guys doing okay on coffee? Okay, I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna offer it to the folks in the room too. There's still plenty of coffee and goodies here, so please help yourself.
So at this point, I think that you were noting, Laura, the opportunity for folks for each of you to kind of make a statement and share your thoughts. That was, we shared the draft with you. It's something that was a good thing that you wanted to do. So, from our folks to start. Christina, you want to start at your end? Or?
Sure. Just about my background and why I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to be here. I have to say that my background is in my academic background from OSU. I went to graduate school and did marine biology and oceanography. So had a really deep interest in marine sciences since I was very young. But I'm particularly thrilled because my first marine biology professor is actually here at the other end of the table. So Jim taught the introduction to marine biology at OSU, and so that definitely inspired me even more to continue my career in oceanography. So then I worked at DEQ for 10 years and was responsible for intercoastal waters and wrote grant proposals to EPA and was very involved with our water quality and estuaries and marine programs there. And then really in the last 14 years, when I worked with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, a lot of our work was around the Oregon coast and actually raising money through mitigation funds through the U.S. Attorney's Office to establish the Oregon Governor's Fund for the Environment. And Louise was very involved as we were setting that up as well. And so that was actual mitigation funds, several million, I think it was a total of $4 million that we were able to secure to be able to invest in salmon habitat and other coastal water quality projects. So I'm very thrilled because being one of the first board members of this new trust is exciting because it really helps us develop the roadmap and try to raise the profile of marine research that's needed and really trying to find the resources. And I'm very passionate about this, and so I'm really thrilled to be here today.
So my background related to this, I'm not going to go through a lot of things, but I'm a veteran of the Marine Reserves Wars from the very beginning on OPAC 1 back in the late 90s through OPAC 2 and the ultimate decision to actually designate marine reserves. and served as the director of DSL, and DSL is the proprietor of the territorial sea out 3 nautical miles, so was involved in all of the discussions around wave energy and wind energy and impacts to coastal resources as a result of those proposals. I also served as chair of the predecessor to OWEB, which was GWEB, the Governor's Watershed Enhancement Board, back in the late 90s and early 2000s. So have gained a bunch of grant-making experience through that. Worked for a nonprofit where I was responsible for writing grant applications, so also come at it from that perspective, and then sat on Christina's advisory committee for the Governor's Fund for the Environment to help make recommendations on funding proposals through that mechanism. When I retired a couple of years ago, I came back almost immediately to run the South Slough National Estuarine Research Reserve. So spent a year in Charleston helping that organization while they were in transition between managers. And I now make my home on the coast, or close enough. Spent a lot of time fishing. Bought a boat this summer that's big enough to take out in the ocean, so I've been spending some time out in the ocean, which is a lot of fun, and care about the coastal communities and the coastal resources. My partner was a commercial fisherman for 23 years, so I have a lot of connections to the commercial fishing industry, and I'm really excited to see this body get up and going. There are a lot of unmet research needs when it comes to our marine resources and coastal resources. And so I'm happy to see this up and going and hope we can bring in a pile of money to help fill that gap.
Great. I'm Laura Anderson, and I am really happy to be here. I was, as Senator Roeblen mentioned, on the Nearshore Research Task Force in 2010, of which this was one of 5, moving parts that were envisioned for improving our understanding of the nearshore environment. And I actually chaired the finance subcommittee that was the subcommittee that had this particular task. And 5 years ago, I was like, I really want to do this. I really want to be a part of this. And when the Ocean Science Trust model was put forward at the end as a recommendation, I was like, gosh, I hope I get to do that. And here I am, so I'm really excited. I would say that, so I often get to sit with an industry or business hat on in the room when these stakeholder groups are put together, because I am in the seafood business from a long time, multi-generational family perspective, and as a restaurateur and fish marketer. But I'm no stranger to policy either. I sit on the Fish and Wildlife Commission for Ed and Dave.
Just handled the wolf issue. Just
took that down in 11 hours. Well, that was the 3rd day of 11 hours. That's right. And not a stranger to academia either. I'm a graduate of the Marine Resource Management program at OSU, and I stay in touch and involved with OSU through various venues as much as I can. So when people have asked me, what's this new thing that you're doing? What's this Ocean Science Trust? My nutshell elevator spiel on this is that we're building an investment strategy for nearshore research. But it's nuanced. It's going to take a balance. There are people that want to fund this strategy that are very interested in the economics of the nearshore, and there are people who are very interested in more of the ecology and the protection of the nearshore. And so building a knowledge base to make the best decisions for the state is really, I think, the purpose for what we're doing here. I think for me, the thing that would keep me up at night if I allowed myself to stay up at night about this is how are we going to set forth those very important research priorities early on and in advance. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement and interest around building capital and bringing in funding and dollars and structuring that in a nice balanced way that has been discussed. But I think as Senator Roblin pointed out, one of the key components of that initial five-legged stool of the Nearshore Research Task Force was to have research priorities clear and in place, and that is nothing less than a huge political deal in and of itself. So how we do that is one of the things that I'm keenly interested in discussing up front. And as far as building the Capitol, I'm so excited to be here. I don't know Jim yet, but I'm sure we'll get to know each other well. But Christina, I've heard her talk about really innovative and creative ways to build partnerships, build relationships, structure capital for these kinds of projects. And so I was so thrilled that you're going to be part of this, because I think that we're going to be using some really well-honed strategies for finding federal funds and some of the known foundations, but really getting creative and innovative, and that is going to be the fun part of this work over time. There's a lot of models out there that we looked at when we were doing the initial research on how California operates, how Washington operates, for example, but this is Oregon. So we're going to do things our own way, but I also think that I went through my notes from that process years ago, and it's here. So there was a lot of research and a lot of work done, and we hired some excellent consultants back at that time to really look at Massachusetts Ocean Partnership and just some great models. So there's that. There's also research priorities already set forth with West Coast Governor's Agreement and with Oregon Sea Grant. We have the conservation strategy for ODF and W. So I think there's a nice base for bringing things together for the next step. So I could go on forever about this. I'm going to refrain from doing so, and just say that I'm really excited to be working with you all.
Oh, I concede some of my time to you. I'm Jim Sumich, and I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to be a part with these people that I'm just getting to know here, except for Christina, of course, because there's a lot of expertise here that I am totally unfamiliar with. My background is basically marine science. I've got my master's and PhD degrees at Oregon State, and my undergraduate at Oregon, so we can balance that out a little bit. And spent most of my adult life teaching in Southern California, and retired a few years ago and moved back to Oregon for very obvious reasons. And so I am just starting to learn the issues that are locally important here. And so I really don't have very much more input right now, but I feel that my broad marine science background is going to be helpful here in terms of looking at and establishing some of these priorities and actually reviewing proposals that eventually do start coming in.
And Christina, if you don't mind coming to read what Emily said.
I want to start by saying I'm sorry I'm not with you in person today. I recently welcomed my second baby boy into the world. I'm staying close to home in Hood River with my baby, husband, and toddler as we readjust to our new and full lives. Don't worry, you'll be seeing more from me in the coming months. I'm honored to join the board of the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. Thank you for the confidence you're placing in me as we navigate this path together for the state's ocean resources. I feel truly excited to explore the important scientific issues facing our coastal resources, as I have a deep love and connection to the marine environment, as well as a commitment to science-based decision-making. In my professional endeavors, I've worked with a diverse group of ocean interests along the U.S. West Coast, and I look forward to engaging with this community again. I have a strong scientific background and a deep commitment to marine stewardship. I bring depth of knowledge and support to the Ocean Science Trust as someone who has worked at the intersection of science and policy for more than a decade. Having developed a comprehensive competitive grant-making program for a large foundation, I bring experience as a grant maker. In my current role as a director of an outdoor science school, I can also provide the perspective as a grant seeker. I am committed to the Trust's responsibility to seek innovative, collaborative, and community-oriented approaches to research and monitoring, and I look forward to getting started. Thank you again for this opportunity. I am truly honored. That's very good.
So I have to go to my next commitment. Thank you all again for being willing to serve. And as my good friend Dick Nichols used to say, go forth and do the work of the Lord.
Thank you, Stephanie.
So I think it's need a quick coffee break or
I'll just get off,
Yeah.
I guess.
So you all are going to have a challenging charge of bringing something together, really basic creation, and it's.
I'll just say this is really important to me, and getting it right is more important than getting it, and that's why it's taken so long time to get organized. The foundational stuff that we do now, and I think Laura especially made it clear, is going to, I think, determine the success of the program as we go on. And I will also say that I have the opportunity to ask a lot of legal questions of the legislative counsel in the legislature, and I'm willing to do that. So we can get some help that way. There are some other groups of people who are really interested, I think, and as we start doing grants and kind of conversations. I have a really close relationship with the 4 tribes that are of the 9 that are in my district, and used to have I still have a lot of connections with my tribes in northern Washington. My grandmother was canoed up the Quinault by the Quinaults to work as a normal school teacher at Lake Quinault, and then taken back down by canoe where her dad picked her up on the beach and took her back home until she got married and could no longer be a teacher. And my dad has a really close relationship with the Macaws because when they were having conversations and most of their property and timber was owned by non-native people, he was there building it as a carpenter and really loved to carve things. And so as they've taken back their lands, more specifically as a tribe, they asked him, and they would give him artifacts and say, could you show us how they made these? Because we've lost a lot of that. And as he always said, as a carpenter and a person who loved wood, the stuff that survives is usually from the best makers, and you can look at it and figure out what they did, and you can redevelop the tools and you can make those things. And so we spent a lot of time with that. And when I came down here, I got on the Native American, the LCIS, which is the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, and continue to develop those relationships. Our tribes are treated so differently than the ones in Washington, it's almost laughable when you think about what rights the Western tribes have in comparison to any of the stuff that the Western tribes in Washington have, and California actually. And so they are really interested in the nearshore, but they come in and they try, but they don't have any access to the nearshore that they used to. And I think they are a big place where research about things that are important to them, they'd be willing to invest in it as they do their other kinds of things, because it really is a part of who they are. They're getting some of their lands back, and they're doing things, I think, really well with the lands they get back. But I think that's another place for us to go look at and look for resources. And that's going to be, in order for this to really get going, as we found with the organization that we have at the State Fair, we've got to get the resources necessary to hire some people and do some stuff, because that's what makes it work. And we will live off whatever we can get from the legislature, DSL, and the governor's office to get this stuff organized. But it is something that weighs on my mind, and I have been and continue to develop good relationships with all my fellow House and Senate members, and they've been good to me over the years. So we will continue to try to find the resources necessary to get this done right, as opposed to, and really exploring the conversations that Louise brought up about how do we structure ourselves. That's really important to get right to begin with. And then meet with people around to make sure that they understand what we're trying to do, and it's not that we're whatever. And I think each of you have opportunities to bring your expertise to people out there in the community to make them feel more secure with what we're going to be trying to do.
Senator Rowland, just to clarify your mention of legislative council, if there were some focused questions that these folks had, can.
Absolutely.
can
We'll ask the
follow
questions.
those.
Yep. Yep. And that one we don't have to pay for.
So I have a question about the task force. They did their job, they created us. Is there a way to continue keeping them engaged as an advisory committee to us? Would that be something that...
Some of the people have moved on, but most of them are around, and all the organizations that were represented there are around. It would probably take some legislation to get some funding for them to do that. I think individuals would be willing. I thought one of the other members was Terry Thompson, who's a county commissioner in Lincoln County. He said he probably was going to try to make it here today. So there are people who would really like to continue to be interested. Sea Grant was kind of one of the major players with us, and the person who was there still works, I think, at OSU, doesn't he?
Was it
Steve Grant?
Steve Grant, he's still working.
Yeah, he's still
Yeah. So I mean, there's some people who have some knowledge that could do it, but there's also Sea Grant that's still alive and well. So I would say that the answer is yes. Part of the stuff that we did, one of the 5 little tools was to reorganize what's the science group that works with
Stack.
and to give them more opportunity to reach out and do things different from what they were doing before. So they can answer questions that we might have. They can answer questions from the governor's office, and they can answer legislative questions that used to be it was only they worked for the one organization. And so we have some scientists that are out there, and they added some new scientists to give a broader perspective of the whole ocean stuff. So we always assumed that we would use them in certain ways with this trust. That was always an underlying assumption, and that's one of the reasons we made the changes. So we do have a group of people who we feel comfortable to ask as advisors as well. And here's one of those other members of our whole task force.
And just to translate, maybe you mentioned it and I didn't hear, it's the OPAC, the Open Policy Advisory Council Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee.
Right. And I didn't say
the
okay,
STAC.
is what STAC is.
Do we have a defined, the trust, does it have a defined relationship with STAC?
I do not believe.
Casual, informal?
I think it's a casual informal. It's not a formal one, but all of the STAC people know that the changes that were made in STAC came about because of the same nearshore task force. So there is that.
So could you say what STAC stands for?
It's a Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee, and we'll get a link to that. I'm going to pull them up on my iPad now.
And there are about, what, 8 or 10 members?
I'd have to go back.
I think it went up. I think it's like
There's a core group, and then there's Stack Plus,
right. That's
and it's issue driven, but it's a kind of a part of OPAC relative to their ability to have scientific advice.
So when I talked about my constant refrain about us, the National Academy, Oregon Academy of Sciences, we kind of, because of the way STAC became that for us, that was the kind of the thought of it, was that they would be the independent scientific review of kinds of things that OPAC is, governor, legislature. Though if the legislature or others want to use them, we have to pay for them. So there hasn't been a lot of that to this point. I hope that the legislature is going through a real conversation right now with regard to how we organize ourselves and our staff that work there full time, and whether we're going to have research staff that really stay on all year long, and we may get a more professional group by committee. And then all of a sudden, if that happens, then there's a pretty good push to get that to happen. And we've been doing some of that. Then the issue would be, could they then necessarily start looking at the kind of questions they need to answer for the next upcoming deal and use STAC? So I think, at least in my vision of how the legislature works, eventually we'll get to a place where when we walk in, we know who the staff are, that they have been researching the information that we're talking about over the long term, and we could actually have some better information as we go in to make laws based on some scientific stuff rather than what everybody's opinion was of the year and who has the most power to get the stuff through. So we'll see how that goes. But that's a long range goal. But I am more than happy, especially in the 17 session when we have unlimited bill potential. In the short session, we don't have as much opportunity, but to look at what kinds of things over the next year that we talk about do we need to get funding for, and can we push that in 17? And the kinds of money we'll be talking about is so much less than what the world, the legislative world of dollars is, that if you get the right people to accept it, if you need 100,000 here or 50,000 there to do something, those numbers are pretty easy if you have the relationships to make that happen. And we're going to have a lot of change in the legislature because we have our co-chairs of Ways and Means. One's running for a statewide office, the other is retiring, so there's going to be a lot of change in that makeup. So it's a good opportunity, actually.
In addition to funding, Senator, any kind of policy or structural changes as well?
Yeah, and I feel really comfortable with doing that as we talk about. So, again, we need to figure out what we think is the best way to do that structurally. And if that needs legislation, I'm more than happy to have that, get that stuff drafted and ask those questions. And if there's questions here about the structure that it is LC that wrote the bill, so they should be able to answer more clearly any of those questions. So if you have a list of them, I will be glad to get it down to them.
So we might want to start with this 501c3 question, just in terms of how that came about for the Cultural Trust. And
okay.
Because you're right, it's very odd that something is made a 501c3 by legislation.
Right.
Because you do have to go through federal paperwork with the IRS to get 501c3 designation.
Yep.
And I'm not sure whether the Cultural Trust has actually done that, and I was going to call Cultural Trust staff yesterday to ask that question, but realized it was a holiday and nobody was going to answer the phone. So I'll also talk to them. But the Cultural Trust is the major part of their funding comes from the tax credit that allows people to write off 100% of their donations to the trust.
Right.
And so it may be that tax exempt status is for state purposes only and not for the federal IRS, but they use the 501c3 language in the statute to get there. But I don't know. So it would be good to ask legislative counsel about that. Because you're right, it's very odd. But it's there, and it seems to work for them. So
how do you get federal designation through a state law?
Exactly. Well, that's sort of it. Yeah.
Is that the question? I was just trying to put there. I mean, the end goal is for the trust. Does it make sense for the Ocean Trust to pursue the same structure?
Well, we need to understand what it means that they did that with the Cultural Trust before we can answer that second question of does it make sense for this trust to have the same sort of thing? And if so, then we'd ask you to put in a statutory amendment to do that at some point. But because, again, I'm concerned about not having access to foundation dollars without that status. And that's a big part of, I think, where the money is.
Especially the bigger foundation.
Yes. Yeah.
When I worked with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and they were actually a nonprofit that was created by Congress as a nonprofit in order to be able to leverage all the private money to help the Fish and Wildlife Service at NOAA. And so I know that there are national models, or like the National Endowment for the Arts. So but I'm not familiar enough with the state of Oregon, whether the state can do the same thing that Congress has done.
Well, obviously they've tried at least once.
Well, and I read the Cultural Trust Enabling Statutes yesterday just to sort of see what that model looked like, and I was sort of stunned to see that it says that they're created as a 501c3. I was like, how do you do that in a state statute? But okay. Maybe that's what we want. So.
Okay, I got that one down. Other questions or thoughts that might be helpful at this early stage that you would like an opinion from any attorney?
At the moment, I can't think of anything.
Okay. As they come up, we'll write them down and send out a note. And also in my office, if you have any questions or you need something, my assistant is Rosie Shatkin, who gets on top of stuff and will keep us informed with this. She's been along for the whole ride, actually. So
Right. What is your last name? Rosie?
Shatkin, S-H-A-T-K-I-N.
So I'm taking some notes about things like sending you a link to the
Okay.
information about the stack and sending
Okay.
you rows. So I'll keep the list and send it to you.
So Chris, I don't know who's running this meeting in terms of walking us through an
That's right.
agenda, but
Yeah,
And neither do I. I mean, this is
it's either you or
if you're ready to.
Gabrielle.
Yeah.
Gabrielle doesn't have a voice, so I guess Chris, you get to do it.
All right. Did you have a chance to review the 2 letters from the different organizations? Do you want to have a discussion about?
yeah, and
At this point?
and I think that ties into sort of the second bullet and the third bullet there, in terms of thinking about moving forward, how we get to a place where we've decided what it is we want to fund ultimately. And so it seems to me that it would be good at our next meeting, whenever we do that, to bring in a panel of folks to sort of talk about what we know and what we don't know, what research is going on off the Oregon coast and where the gaps are. To sort of have that conversation. And it may be that there's already some documents that lay that out clearly in one place. I don't know. My guess is there's not. So it would be good to have Compass and Lisa and maybe folks from OIMB and Hatfield
OPAC,
Marine
even,
Science Center or OPAC, whatever that collection is, and not just the science, but the economic issues as well. So, Sue Hannah et al. Group, just in terms of, what don't we know that we need to know to make good decisions.
So just to clarify, the Compass offer would be to provide the legwork to actually pull that together for you.
Yes.
So I think they can provide ideas, and you all can, respond to those and say, yeah, that was fine, but we need to see this person or that person that all of you know about or that others can suggest. So I think if absent resources, staff to do that for you, they are willing to step in and help do that, help bring scientists to the table from different places.
Yeah.
And that's no small job.
Right.
I was kind of looking at Ed. It's like, where do you start? I mean, there's a whole vast array of people out there, but I think that it's important that we start this conversation up front so that we can start to determine how and whom will be setting these research priorities so that as the funds flow in, we're on top of it.
Could I jump in for a second on that
Yeah.
point, if that's all right? I mean, this, in my mind, you've got a real challenge in front of you because the task force recommendations kind of tackled this chicken and egg problem. And the key parts that really don't have standing are, other than, there's some disparate plans for the coast, the near shore. But they haven't been pulled together comprehensively yet. I'm a little parochial from the standpoint of our own Oregon nearshore strategy, which is part of the state conservation strategy. That would be a good starting place, but that by no means is comprehensive relative to everything going on. So you have this need for a comprehensive look at connecting the dots on the pragmatic management needs of the near shore and then the research aspects and monitoring aspects that tie that together to allow adaptive management and knowledge to flow. So that's one piece that's missing a little bit, but we can pull it together as best possible for you. The other piece that really was behind all this concern about having an entity chase money and secure money is the ramifications of the color of that money and the strings attached to it. And so having that sort of plan vetted through a public, where you have local ownership, legislative sort of, at least through the Coastal Caucus and blessing, really would diffuse the concern about who's paying for it if what they're paying for is approved.
Right.
And so there's, once again, you don't quite have that public group form which the task force identified as the working group, or at least some semblance of some way to vet some of this. So that makes your challenge exquisite from the standpoint of you've got to start chasing money, forming this without those two. So it would be interesting to at least discuss how to fill those voids effectively, concurrent perhaps with what you're trying to do. But I do think if you try to take on several panels to say what are research priorities, you'll duplicate what Laura went through on the task force, which was probably a year's worth of, and I found I was kind of naive. There is a lot of parochial and turf issues within the academic world on
Right.
science jurisdiction and who's doing what, and so be nice to try to stand on what they did, move forward somehow without revisiting all of that. But we as an agency and the other executive branch, through the, and this is perhaps to you, Gabriella, through the Marine Cabinet, perhaps there's a way to kind of coalesce some sort of management need-based, that pulls key elements of the different plans together that could give you a start for prioritizing.
I can share with you from the work that I've done on a regional level, the priorities that the mayor's office is articulating and sees. And part of this is from discussions with the team at ODFW, but others is climate change, adaptation, both natural and both natural and human communities, in particular ocean acidification, and what that means for Oregon's, in particular for all of the living marine resources, in particular the commercial resources. Another issue that is more Oregon specific, but knowledge about our nearshore fisheries, the stock assessments that the federal government doesn't do. Their boats frankly can't get in, and it's benefiting the smaller boat fisheries. That's another issue where I've heard over and over, we just don't have enough science, and this is something that's very important to go to communities, etc. Linda has spoken about that. So those are some, again, those are, that last one is more based just kind of on experience and what I've been hearing. So I think there's ways that there can be forums through the stack, through OPAC, and using the Ocean Policy Advisory Council as a listening forum, a public engagement forum. There's an opportunity there for some pioneering to use that infrastructure that does have some resources dedicated to piggyback on that and take advantage. And OPAC is going through a visioning process now. Gina Carter is a public member of OPAC, and so there's some nice cross-fertilization because I know she's going to be following this group. So those are some preliminary, very high-level thoughts about things that seem like obvious priorities for the trust to consider.
So, Ed, I want to make sure I understood what you said. You're suggesting we don't need to establish priorities because they've already been set in the nearshore strategy, which has not been formally adopted yet, but is close to being there.
We have as a state framework, we've got the Oregon Nearshore Strategy for those purposes that it was set up for. But I just didn't want to say it's comprehensive for all interest base. But we do have that. We've got territorial sea plan elements, which are partially embraced. We've got several different regional planning groups. The West Coast Governors Alliance has done a good job of necking this down, as Gabriella said, into several big ticket things. And part of channeling for Gabriella, giving your voice, is that we all feel it's very important for this group to get off the ground with some really important kind of goodwill-esque sort of things that can be a focus. And right now, there's really very little controversy surrounding exerting more leadership and getting some better information on the sort of things related to climate change and ocean acidification. And then she touched on the nearshore understanding of somewhat fishery independent information that goes into the stock assessments that currently constrain a lot of the fishery management. And it's a federal domain of which they don't put many resources into because most of their management interest is bigger fleet management beyond the nearshore. And so having something to fill in that void and help with our federal partners more actively would really bode goodwill towards this group if they help facilitate that. And this has been identified as a high priority for the Coastal Caucus of Legislators and both conservation and fishery interests on the coast. So those sort of things, I think we can take what you would hear if you formed a lot of panels, which would be this huge amount of things to consider. I think if you focus on what we've done internally, the regional partnerships that have looked at prioritization, and there's, the West Coast Governors Alliance is down to 3 or 4 key things. And then I think you could easily neck this down and get right to work as opposed to taking a year sorting through all that. This is my 2 cents.
Some of these are very obvious wins and goodwill generation, and no one can dispute that they aren't significant or important. And it can be just an early decision that you will make that you can point to, authorizing or things that justify or document the importance of these things, while you can build out over the long term maybe the capacity for a more comprehensive, more nuanced look. You have that ability to take in some information and make some early decisions about a short list and go forward. And you would have support, you'd have scientific support for that. Again, without having to do an exhaustive document.
One thing I could suggest so that we could all be up to speed at the same level is, because I was wondering what was going on with the West Coast Governors Alliance and what progress they've made in the last 4 years of the funding that they've had and the nearshore plan. Would it be possible maybe at the next meeting to have kind of an orientation session and have some presentations about where those different initiatives are? Because I know there are so many different partnerships out there that are combining science, like PMEP and others that have all these partners. They have their action plans, they have their strategies, they have their top 2 or 3 priorities that they've identified. So it might just be helpful for us to get kind of an orientation session, if you will, since some of us have been more or less involved in some of those. And like, for instance, Jim hasn't been all that familiar with a lot of this work since he's the scientist, and so it would be helpful, I think, for him to learn about some of these other initiatives in the nearshore plan.
Yeah, you have to. And as it happens, Gina has been very involved with PMEP.
Okay.
Can you say the names?
So the Estuarine Fish Habitat Partnership. Lisa's actually the coordinator of that group.
We had one person join us since we've started, Bob Bailey. Say hi.
Thanks. I don't want to talk behind her, jump in inappropriately, but I would just say, from my experience, for those who don't know me, I ran Oregon's ocean program for a number of years. So I was deeply interested in research aspects related to that. You can knock yourself out through a year-long or 2-year-long process trying to discover every research need in the world. And so I think the discussion here about focusing is totally appropriate. And as your own entity, I think you're pretty much free to make your own targeting. You don't have to be, you all come and let's winnow it down. But I do think you need to adopt some principles, some basic principles for making these decisions. And it might be things that, one of them might be that you're going to look at research needs to support management in, for instance, the territorial sea. Now, it could be, you could make it even more specific than that, but key your decisions to certain principles or outcomes that for the stakeholders that are out there in the world, they can look back at why you made certain decisions. Do they meet some basic priorities that you want to set? Because by the time you go through a research needs exercise, those research needs might change, but the basic principles for making them should remain somewhat uniform, as it were. That's my only comment, because this is, I think, some basic principles about your decision making about the kinds of research programs or initiatives that you'd want to fund. Those are going to be around for a long time. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. And Bob was another one of those members of our Nearshore Task Force program at the time, and actively engaged.
And I think, if I may say that what Bob is speaking to, the development of principles, was really something that the Nearshore Task Force had to do back in the beginning. And those principles are here documented in this recommendation with 6 bullet points. So we have, of course, the ability to review those, revise those as needed, but a lot of this work is done.
Can I ask, I tracked down this.
Page 10.
And the only one that I found said a draft. Is there a final? Because I couldn't find what was online. This is what do you know what it says final?
Yeah.
It's not marked draft.
Yeah,
August 1, 2010 is the final.
Yeah.
It's 2015.
Oh, that's the initial strategy. I'm sorry. Okay. That's what I was looking. That was okay. I'm sorry. As you can tell, I'm not far from all some of this. That's okay. It's right here. So this is the draft. Take it away.
And then the other stuff.
I think it would be wise to take Compass up on this offer to summarize
I agree.
what's happening with the, realization that the organizations that would be available to present to us really need to narrow the narrative down to what's relevant to the principles, because the rat's nest is out there of the myriad. I remember the bubble diagrams going crazy when you start mapping all of the connections and what's happening. So, but I would support more Compass's offer.
Yeah. And I think Fish and Wildlife and their show plan is another document we all need to understand. And if we want to have some of them present, that would be helpful for this group as well. Happy to do so.
Yeah, and I think Louise's question maybe specifically was, does that Nearshore plan, what's the name of the document, Nearshore strategy, set out research priorities? And it really does not have specific research priorities listed, unlike some of the other documents. It's a very broad framework, so it provides a good basis.
Yeah.
But that was not part of this that was adopted and finalized just 2 or 3 months ago. The commission adopted the revision, the updated revision.
Which is very similar
strategy.
to the Territorial Sea Plan. It outlines and gives you a lot of information about it, but it doesn't specifically get down to research priorities. Is that correct?
Well, it gives you the context for research priorities as the kind of conservation actions, but it doesn't specifically go down into the details. And once again, I'm not sure how far this group needs to winnow it down into the very details. As long as you're principle-based and you have some broad priorities, then you can see how funding mechanisms flow relative to those broad priorities within those principles. So I'm not sure you need to have a plan that prescribes the research itself.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to avoid is 300 applications coming in the door if we ever get to the point where we're running a grant program, and that we have set some half dozen or less priorities that we want to see proposals around, because they are the important things that we need information about in order to make decisions going forward. And so stock assessments, ocean acidification, hypoxia, whatever they are. But it seems to me that before we start asking for proposals from the world, we want to tell them what kinds of proposals we're looking for, and we want those to tie into what the state's needs are to help inform policy going forward. And so I do think there's got to be some way for us to sort of get information from a variety of sources so that we can winnow down that laundry list of things that people think we need research on to those that we think are the key critical research pieces we need for those policy pieces.
And I envision this, the role that was envisioned for the Stack Plus, what have you, I think could be relevant to this. We need to tap into that expertise of the actual research community. We're blessed to have one real researcher here, but for the rest of us, we're policy people, business people, what have you. So that may be part of that next meeting as well, is to try to tap into and or even convene that group and see if there's a core there that could be expanded for this purpose. I think Ed described it as being, kind of situational, and what STAC's composition is. Situational is one thing for TSP, another thing for marine reserves.
Right. I think that's something that you as Compass in carrying this out.
Right.
You expect to rely on the stack
Right. I agree.
forward, and so it would be important to include them as part of this briefing. But there may be other, I have not found one, pull it up here, I have not looked to see who's on there now, but that flexibility to bring other people on, despite the strong OSU focus here, there are other, entities around the state, PSU, OHSU, so that might be a value also to bring in some other
term that we used a lot back then was firewall, and
Right.
it's in the the framework here. Is we're kind of there's the funder and there's the research. We're here to bring it together, but we're not really the ones setting the research priorities or giving the money.
Right.
We're just here to make the connection and the partnership.
And find out, listening to all the scientists, hone it down to that few things we're really going to spend the money on to begin with that we think will make the biggest difference. And I think honing that down and getting a clear sense of what we want to look at will also help with funders.
Exactly. Yes,
We
exactly.
have a pretty clear agenda.
Yeah, because we're going to ask for money from funders for us to show.
And I think that's including the legislature.
Yes.
When the money that we've actually put towards research, where we actually got dollars in, other than what we do to fish and wildlife is more of a general one, is the Alcee hatchery. We got a fair amount of money comparatively for research to Alcee because it was honed down. It was the one thing they were going to look at fish. When we set it up with the understanding that they would raise their own money, and then they did, but they didn't do the research people wanted to do because that wasn't what the people were funding. And so then people got upset. We finally came back and said, okay, now we have to put state money in if we really want state answers to state questions. And so I think the same would be true with this group if we were going to ask for state money to do the same things. If they knew it was in the same priorities, the chances of getting some of that would be more likely.
So it sounds like we're headed towards taking Compass up on their offer,
Yes.
and asking them to bring together information around a couple of key pieces. One is talking to Stack and sort of figuring out that piece. One is where we are in West Coast Governors Alliance, and particularly with climate change and ocean acidification specifically, and nearshore strategy, stock assessments, and whatever else there may be there that are really high priorities from the state's perspective on that. And I don't know, are there other biggies we should, there are a lot of, I mean, you've got Hatfield Marine Science Center, you got OIMB down in Charleston, you've got a lot of research, the South Slough, so you've got a lot of places where research has gone on for a number of years, and I don't know how we engage those, whether we need to engage those folks.
I would say probably the Sea Grant Marine Research Information.
Yeah, I had Sea Grant on my
should
list
be
also.
Part of this.
Yep.
Yep.
And you've got the state and federal agencies, and so there's sort of this group of folks, and having Compass sort of do the reach out to all of those and trying to pull together some information for us about.
Would be great.
Well, they have a grant to do it, too.
Right.
They have resources.
Yes.
But communicating to them that it's a particular nuance of, if you just ask them, you pull together panel scientists to tell what are the big issues on Oregon code, for Oregon is different than saying, because this is focused on state priorities and giving them that guidance to say there's a lot of constructs out there. We want to hear from the scientists, but within these frameworks that we expect to address.
Yeah, and I think we do want to stay focused on the territorial sea.
I agree.
Could they bring, when we request this, could they bring a draft idea to us that we could respond to?
Yes.
And can we do that through email, or how?
Yeah, I think what we can, let's see, what's the best way to do this?
They can put information in front of us through email. We can't respond to it or have a conversation about it. Two of us can have a conversation.
Right, exactly.
But no more than two of us at a time can have a conversation about it. And that's a slippery slope, because I can have a conversation. You can have a conversation. And all of a sudden you're violating.
That's the Lane County.
Yeah, exactly. All of a sudden you're violating the public.
I just wanted to clarify, because I think it would be important, since they're not sitting here at this meeting, they're not listening to our ideas, that we can ask them to do this, we can try to provide some clear guidance, but I would like to have some input on like a final list of topics or presenters that would come and help us.
So after you're all having staff right now, because I have a very strong interest in supporting this. I will work with Cassina to capture this conversation.
Okay.
Get it to you all. If you all don't mind, they can send edits your way, and you could do a final document, and then you all can send that to Congress. I'm happy to help. And they were very sorry that they couldn't be here today, but they all happen to have a meeting today that they're running and attend.
Yeah.
So does that sound like a way forward?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I also wanted to bring up one other thing, speaking of meetings. I know we're obligated to 2 meetings a year, but it seems to me that we've got a lot to do to try to get this off on the right foot and the right direction, and that just requires a meeting to do that, since we can't really do it offline. So I would suggest that we think about the meeting schedule for next year, and just I'm willing to meet more, but it's just up to my fellow colleagues here, but I really think that having more than 2 meetings, especially if we're going to have a report to the legislature by spring of 2016, that we should probably have something to report to them. So it would be helpful to have maybe.
We're used to people making up what they have to say, so it's not. But the reality is, it would be nice.
It would be nice to have real stuff.
Some real stuff.
Yep. Sounds good.
I just want to put that out there that I'm
watching the Republican.
I'm absolutely willing to
And there might be 10 legislators who might read this report.
That's the other issue.
Yeah.
It's getting in the right place, though, and we need to do that. And I along that same line, I think that as we start to figure out who we are, get our bylaw, get some other kinds of stuff, so we flesh that out. Going out and having conversations with OPAC, being on their agenda to let them know we're getting going. Here's what we are is going to be important. Having conversations and getting on the agendas of. And this can be done after the bill deadline is. So you're in the legislature's end, they're all there. So then there's the natural resources, there's 3 or 4 different committees in both the House and Senate that look for things to do after they've got their bill work done and the session isn't over. That's a good time to get in and have a little presentation from a group of us saying, here's what we're trying to do and why we're doing it. So you start getting them used to the idea this group exists, and they're going to be coming back asking for resources after they've figured out where they want to go and how important the near shore is. I mean, just to start getting that information. And you can do that at times as a group with our Fish and Wildlife people or with DEQ. I mean, there's a whole lot of groups that and agencies that have needs and like to express them in different ways. And if we start developing relationships with all of them and understanding the kinds of things that they need and where we're going to go, and then getting in front of legislators so they start to understand that we do exist and we're going to have some stuff. The sooner we do that, I think, the better. If we're going to be asking them for money and other kinds of stuff in the future. And I don't have any problem doing that. So.
I was trying to remember, even in the short session, is that what that time period is when the policy committees close?
Right, it's very quick. So by the end of February, you're either done or you're not done. And because there's fewer bills, what happens is you've got like 2 weeks at the beginning to get them out of the Senate to go to the House. And then they've got 2 weeks to get them out and off to the governor. So, I mean, it's very quick. And sometimes you'll be in a committee that the second half, nothing came out of the House that you had to work on, or you had one bill, so you do it, and then you've got a couple more scheduled meetings. That's a good time to get in there and talk to people. But then we have to know what we're going to tell them, and that's coming up fairly soon, because that's February.
But also, they're ready to schedule. The schedule can happen.
The schedule can happen fairly easily and quickly, actually.
Close to it doesn't take a lot of advance planning.
Correct.
They won't know what their availability is.
That's right.
So you have more breathing room between now and mid-February.
Yep.
If by early February you all had a sense of, we'd like to come and make a presentation, a 20-minute presentation before a committee or some subset of you, we could.
Correct.
You haven't.
I think very much we could have that conversation in February. Yeah.
I would suggest perhaps you could give them periodic updates to the land board too. Maybe they'd like to
That's
put
true.
out.
That's true. I think there are different
Face
groups
to
we
the
should
name.
talk to let them know that we're starting and we're going to do things. And OPAC likes people to come and tell them what's going on. They get their feelings hurt from time to time.
Paul?
So OPAC meets on December 3rd in Tillamook. Is someone going to be there to talk about this?
Oh,
Should it be on their agenda?
That's a good question.
So the agenda hasn't really been set yet,
Right.
but there is an intent to extend an invitation to all of the science members. So both participate and probably also present, but it hasn't been set yet.
Right.
Our agenda committee is still meeting.
So there could be one person there just to alert them to the fact that you've had this meeting and what you're...
That's true.
Well, at a minimum, I would make it part of my governor's office report. So the fact that you have met and what your early conversations are, I would be happy to deliver that. But it's
that's
going
good
to
to
be
know.
at the Tillamook
Port of Tillamook,
Port of
the
Tillamook.
officers
Officer,
behind the
there's
hangars
officer.
there.
I could be available for that meeting as well.
Yeah, so can I.
Okay, that would be great.
So-
That'd be great,
that
actually.
was something else, and this gets back to your email question. If you all are interested in setting up an Oost Gmail account to subscribe to the OPAC listserv, we can get you on the OPAC listserv. I was going to offer to send the emails to Ann and Lydia to get you on the list so you just get the OPAC meeting.
You just do that by yourself, you can self-subscribe to a listserv. It's
Yeah.
quite simple.
Yeah, it's just a question of whether you want to do that with your personal emails, which don't get shared. So you can already go ahead and just go to the Ocean Policy Advisory Council webpage and subscribe, and so you'll get meeting notices. And there's another ton of emails from that.
So is that Tillamook at what time?
Paul, is that an
It's
all-day
an all-day
meeting?
deal.
Yeah.
Probably, like you said, the agenda hasn't been set, but I imagine 9 or 10 in the morning.
So Gina and I are on the executive committee to set that, so we can both give you a time certain. We'll talk about it for the agenda, but if at least a couple of you are able and willing to come, we can give you a time on the agenda to have an informal conversation with OPAC. And this conversation has really made me think about the stack, and that OPAC has not for quite some time, kind of formally convene the stack, and that might be something, a fruitful discussion to talk about it at the next OPEC meeting. You all will be more ready. Maybe that is a focal point for the OPEC meeting to have a combined Ocean Science Trust stack OPEC conversation at the spring meeting, which usually is in May or early June.
If I might, just one more thing. When you're talking to stack or about stack, what we found is most fruitful is you really narrow it down and make it very specific. In conversation with stack, there's a lot of folks that they want to go in a lot of different directions. Many of them self-serving, so when you have a conversation with staff, you really do want to have those priorities in place so you can tell them this is what we're interested in. These the boundaries, the scopes, the limitations on the kind of research we're interested in, so that they clearly know what they're doing. Because if they don't have that roadmap in front of them, they will go their separate ways. The conversation will be fruitful for you. So.
Well, some other possible topics we had on the agenda were a discussion of bylaws. I think Ms. Holliday mentioned the Cultural Trust. We sent you guys their bylaws as an example to look at. I got those from their executive director. We played phone tag quite a bit, so I haven't spoken to him since I got them. But Brian Rogers, if you have any questions, be happy to talk to him about that. I don't know if Louise, if you have any plans to call Brian or...
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Chris, I don't know if you've followed up yet with DOJ about the question I posed to you about whether we could adopt bylaws without going through rulemaking. So, and this is where I think the Cultural Trust is different from us. As a 501c3, they probably could. I'm not sure we can.
Okay.
So it's a legal question. It's not something Ledge Council can help with.
Right.
You got to ask DOJ that question.
Okay.
It's a pretty quick question to whoever's doing land board stuff these days, whether we can do bylaws as opposed to rulemaking to adopt how we're going to operate.
Okay.
So one thing I can look is if a legal opinion was done for the Environmental Justice Task Force,
Okay.
was given similar ability to set rules, and if there are some members who believe they developed bylaws, we haven't been able to track them down through transitions. That the thread was lost on that, but it may be something we can track down through DOJ.
Okay. Well, and that's what DOJ can probably quickly answer the question, because I'm sure they've answered the question more than once about that issue. So.
Yep.
I can ask Paul Gray, who he can do as a solid and just look for the charging.
Right.
Anyway.
So, because we really have to have bylaws before we can set up any kind of structure with regard to, is there a chairperson of the trust?
Or rules of procedure,
Or rules of
whatever,
procedure,
yeah,
all those
whatever,
kinds of things,
something,
including
you
the
know.
stuff that
Right.
Bob talked about too. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the question is whether we have to do that by rule or
Or just
by formal
by
rulemaking. And I
Right.
think the answer to that question is probably going to be yes, because we're a state entity, but we'll see if they...
The Environmental Justice Task Force does not.
Interesting.
So we may adopt any rules. So I tell you what, why don't I step out? I can call now. So if you'd like.
Get a hold of them, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll give it a shot. Because this is kind of an important question.
Yeah, because if we could just do bylaws without having to
Yeah.
go through the whole rulemaking process, it would certainly make at the start.
Okay. Yeah. My thought, if you're going to definitely, I mean, I'm not sure. I'll see what he says. I think you certainly would want to adopt rules if you ever get to the point of administering a competitive grant program.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
But let's see if we...
But I know state agencies have, like the land board has a set of rules about its procedures on how it operates. So, how do they notify the public? How do they, use Robert's Rules of Order? So I'm curious whether we can do that without rulemaking.
Okay.
I will, my head is fuzzy now. I feel like I'm on this track on one of the various policy areas that I work on, and there was an ability to establish bylaws that were not rules.
Yeah, well, so a task force is not a decision-making body, so that may be different. The trust is a decision-making body, so different status.
But at this point, again, I mean, it depends what you mean by decision, but certainly, I mean, I think everybody, it sounds like that, like when you're handling money and giving out money, that's one thing, but this phase of just the administrative structure for you to have conversations.
But it's good to ask the lawyers to find out if that's true.
Yeah. That's why we have
Because you
them.
get down the road too far and all of a sudden you're making decisions and you haven't got this.
And every decision ends up getting challenged because you didn't adopt by rule. You're
Right.
going to make those decisions. So, yeah.
Yep. But it would be helpful because you need some kind of organizational group to
Yes.
call meetings, to
Yes.
start doing the stuff that these other people are doing
Yes.
within the trust. And then eventually, I know you'd have to have rules when you start hiring a person to help do that kind of stuff. Or
Right.
figuring out how we're going to get some of that done and the resources necessary to do it, whether it's getting DSL, but finding a budget area so we can put money into it so DSL understands that that is part of the responsibility and here's the money to go with it.
Right.
And to me, that's the short-term best answer, is to get funding,
An appropriation.
an
to get
appropriation
some
for
part-time
DSL
staff
that
in
gives
place.
part-time staff in place, yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's, that doesn't take a bill, actually. It takes Ways and Means to decide that it's a function in a place that they want to do it. And we're talking about very little money,
Right.
in the couple $100,000 range, probably. That it might be worthwhile in this short session to try to have that conversation with my Ways and Means people. Well, actually before, right now, about starting to have a conversation with them to say, look, here's what we're trying to do, what we need to do, and we need some help to make it happen.
Well, and I would say in the process of doing some support work for this, I've had some conversations with funders, and certainly from more than one funder, what I hear is, well, if the state thinks this is important, but isn't willing to put skin in the game.
Correct.
Yeah,
It's always
exactly.
right. That's kind of
Yes.
always the trend.
Exactly.
That's always the case. We agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
reason why that would be.
And the question is, do we put the money, and that's one Deborah and I talked to, do we ask for the appropriation for the governor's office to have them do it? Do we have them ask DSL to do it?
So I would think DSL should put a pop in as part of their budget and see where it goes in the
But that's
governor's
not till 16. They don't
GRB.
get a pop for the short session. do
Oh,
they?
you're talking about doing this in the
I'm just-
short session?
Right, I'm trying to get a
Getting
little
Oh.
right now.
Getting money for staffing now.
There's a fund set up in the treasury. So
That's right.
So you put that in the bill. So
So we could put the money in there and use that to pay DSL or whatever, whoever we need to have the personnel. That would work.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
so the
Do remember that.
mechanism is that I can't remember.
And they don't ask for any.
So you just do a bill to appreciate
I wouldn't
$200,000 to
wouldn't
the
even
account?
necessarily do a bill. What I would do is say to the Ways and Means.
Yeah, got it.
When one of our.
Well, it has to go in the
session
Christmas
deals-
tree bill at the
Yeah,
end.
every session has a
Yeah.
Christmas tree bill, and
Yeah.
just say, we want, $200,000 stuck in there. It's really important to me. Make sure it happens, Mr. President.
There you go. There you go.
And it goes into this fund that we already set up. It's just sitting there waiting.
And it
for
would be there this
$200,000.
biennium for
And it would be
use.
there this biennium to
Okay,
get things
that would be
going.
sweet if that could
That
happen.
would be very sweet. I think part of it is also now that
But then we'll have to
you
figure out
all-
rules on how to spend it.
Yes.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean, it'll be in the treasury.
Yes.
But they're going to want some
Yes. Yeah.
authorization and
yeah.
and that'll be a responsibility of this group.
Yeah.
So having 2 meetings alone a year probably is not going to be enough. I agree with that.
But now that you are empaneled, I think that also makes for more confidence
Right.
in appropriating these
Right.
funds. I think there's a chicken and egg thing before they see who's at the table and who's going to be managing these funds. It probably would have been much more challenging.
I agree.
So.
And so one of the things you might want to think about, even to make it more palatable, is since you're probably only going to be funding staffing for a half of the biennium,
That's true.
$100,000 would be plenty. And if you're doing a half-time staff, that's probably more than you need. So just depending on how
Or
you're
if we're
doing, if
just
you're
using
contracting
people
with
who are already
somebody,
here and contracting with it.
Yeah,
with DSL,
whatever.
say Castelli or whoever.
or
we're gonna
buying
pay
a piece
part
of time,
Exactly.
staff time here, yeah.
Right.
Or buying a couple of secret fellows.
What?
That's
yeah,
true.
whatever.
Okay. So you think 100,000?
Yeah. because you're not likely to have anybody on board until June
That's
or
true.
July, and so you're only talking about half the biennium.
Although also if you did go the Sea Grant Fellow route, you could probably get somebody quickly and full-time.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, there's a.
But again, it wouldn't be more than $100,000 for.
That would not.
Yeah, no. So.
But you may be able to use some money for consultant time.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
To do specialized tasks.
Yeah.
For DOJ time. I mean, for I don't know.
Yeah, or to cover the expenses, travel expenses, as opposed to taking that out of DSL's hide.
Yeah.
Right, and then
So.
figuring out how to get, I mean, once you understand what kind of things you want in a bylaw, it's nice to have an attorney put those together.
Yeah.
A lot of them will
Although
do it
bylaws
free, so
aren't that hard to draft.
That's true.
I mean,
That's true. That wouldn't be as hard.
Yeah, it's just bylaws and
Yeah.
not rulemaking.
Right,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rulemaking's another matter. but-
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's where thinking about putting that in the 17 governor's budget.
Yes.
I think that's if you have enough of a fuel for of getting a grant program up and running,
Yeah.
then you'll need the rulemaking for that.
Yeah, well, and one of the things in 2017, the way the legislation's written now, at some point we're going to select one of us to be an executive
That's what I was
director,
gonna
which is
say.
a little weird.
Right.
So I think at some point we want to change that to be select a chair
Right.
and have the authority to hire an executive director. But given that there was no money, it made a lot of sense
Right.
in terms of the startup phase to go that way. But I think you want to change that governance model.
Yeah, I was
Once we
actually
have
going to
funding.
bring that up when
Yeah,
we
it's-
got to
yeah,
that,
yeah.
like why not
Yeah.
a chair as opposed to an executive director.
Well, there's certain people in the group that probably wouldn't want to be a chair. They'd rather be the executive director. The ones we selected. No.
Well, I was just curious about
Yeah.
the difference.
Well, so executive
difference is
director
no money.
constitutes somebody who's actually doing work as opposed to just chairing meetings and helping set the agenda with staff. And it's a little, but it was to get the thing started.
Okay.
It was actually to get a minimal fiscal on the
Yes,
Yes, got
bill. So we
an
could get.
unpaid executive director.
it. That's what most nonprofits have.
That's true.
So what we're talking
That
about
is
though
true.
for this fiscal ask would fund a person for a year to be the executive director. We talked about somebody within the staff already, somebody who was like a Sea Grant fellow,
Right.
or hiring somebody
Yep.
from the outside. I think, those are very different types
Very
of
different.
people.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know how realistic it is, and I certainly don't have any kind of short list or even one candidate in my head, but I see the importance of the long-term relationship building and trust building is going to be really critical because of the size of the dollar asks that we're going to be making, and having somebody with a lot of credibility who is starting those contacts and those conversations from the beginning, who's going to be following that through over a period of time. To me, there's a lot of value in that. May not be necessary for the quasi-mundane tasks of bylaws and calling meetings and so forth, but I would tend to want to start off on the deep professional end of the spectrum myself, but recognizing that given time frames, and I don't know what the applicant pool is like, at least having some administrative support would be useful.
Right. And I see that at this ask is more about administrative support.
Yeah,
Get
that's
things in place, and then when we start getting money in, or actually start organizing, then we start looking for that professional
Okay.
person. That's kind of where
I just wanted to clarify
Yeah, we
that.
may.
Because right now we won't have
For the
enough
first year, we may just
Right.
want to contract with somebody,
Right.
whether it's a piece of DSL
Right.
staff time or contract with somebody out in the
Okay.
streets to get things up and
But I agree with you, once
with
we
no
start really
long-term
being
commitment,
the
yeah.
agents, the trustful we can be, and start having some money, then we need to have some of those long-term professional development kinds
Yeah,
of people.
well, and you want somebody who can write
Right.
grants,
That's
because
right. Exactly.
it's going to be a big part of what they're doing to get the money, so.
Although I think the agency folks, I mean, part of, and you all correct me who were there at the inception, but there is a mechanism now where state agencies would come with grant proposals and that would come to the legislature. They would have to get that limitation. It impeded nimbleness in seeking funds. And so I think part of the thought that I had is that the agencies will also be putting together grant proposals.
Right.
And doing
So we could
that lead work, and it would be, a review responsibility.
And I would say that actually in my own belief structure that my hope would be that the legislature would gain enough confidence in this group making some of those decisions, that they would say, yeah, I mean, we do want to fund the XYZ in Fish and Wildlife or in DEQ or whatever to do this, but we don't have the expertise to know that. We want the fund we'll give you the money. Here's kind of where we think it needs to be spent. It's on state priority, so we've got it there. And I would hope that the agencies would put in the request saying, here's what we want funded. And if we develop trust in stuff that gets done for the agencies is the kind of stuff that the legislature wanted to get done, but they didn't feel like they had the expertise. Right now, what we do is figure out that people put in a proposal, and then they go fight over it, and some get funded for no apparent reason, and others don't in the legislature, because we don't have enough expertise. The person who makes the best ask generally wins. And that might not necessarily be what we think is the most appropriate to finish up the work we're doing. And I know the agencies have a hard time finding any resources from us when it comes to outside. I mean, they'll have the general run the agency, and then all we do is complain that they don't do X, Y, and Z. And they say, well, we had a POP that said we were going to do that, but you didn't do the POP.
Right.
So it's very expressive. Or actually, a lot of the POPs that I thought were really important this last time got cut before they came out of the executive office. I mean, they come up with these ideas, and then they finally come up with the decision of what's the government budget going to have, and some of those don't make it through that.
Right.
The biggest one for me this last time was had to do with the extension services and all the statewide stuff. It has every year for the last number of years. It just goes down to zero almost, and then we come back and fight for whatever we can get. And that's been a consistent thing, which makes it really hard to run those places. So hopefully we solve that this last time.
But it lets the local legislators be the heroes.
It does. Yeah, right. That's true. There are some of that as well.
Yes.
Well, one other point, just to build on what you were saying, that you all can corroborate who are involved in this. The other thing is to the degree that the legislature does put in money, the trust is in a position to go around and
Yes.
turn around
Match that.
and ask for matching funds. From
Right.
That's a really positive thing. And if we develop as a trust a really good relationship with our agencies, so they understand then they become partners too. Right now, I would expect if I was them, I'd be a little nervous about it because we might have a totally different priorities than they do, and all of a sudden, how do we make this all work? So, giving up anything they might get the legislature to do with trust it'd be hard for me to fight for that if I was in an agency right now. After that time goes on and development happens, I think that kind of thing could be of greater advantage. When they know we could double their money and use it because we can get some other stuff and they couldn't get, that might help us.
I had a question about mitigation funds, because I was just going over the legislation here, and it describes the types of money that can go into the fund. But I was wondering, when I was with NIFIC, we were working very closely with the U.S. Attorney's Office, where they would, whenever they would have fines, they could convert part of that into a contribution to NIFIC. And that's how Louise and I got the Oregon Governor's Fund started. I was just wondering if there was any discussion about being able to access those kinds of funds moving forward.
So
through
all
the U.S. Attorney's through litigation.
Oh, it's through the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Through a U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yeah, well, so that's a possibility. All of the state fines are already either going to the general fund or go to a certain dedicated source, but
not the federal.
Yes.
So I was just wondering if there's any.
There was no.
It's a conversation we could have, though.
Yeah. At the time we were doing this, I don't recall it ever coming up.
Is there a prohibition
I don't,
reaching out to the U.S. Attorney's Office?
We need another new Carissa.
Yeah.
We can accept from any source.
Yeah.
So,
that's true. So we could. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have someone you could reach out to?
Yes. I mean, but I don't want to do that, and
Yeah,
right.
knowing if it's okay to do that.
Right.
So.
No.
Yeah.
I think that any funds makes that a possibility, and I have no problem asking that question of my legislative council who wrote that, so they would.
Yeah, I think it's pretty broadly written.
Pretty clear,
I think
yeah. We tried to make it as broad as
accept
we
it from
could.
anywhere.
Well, sometimes it could be as little as $10,000 or $20,000, and sometimes it's in the millions. It just
Right.
depends on what kind of incident it is. But since there really isn't that same kind of fund anymore,
Right.
it would be helpful to
Yeah,
see if we could move forward.
So I don't know if the U.S. Attorney's Office would want to tie it to events that occur in the territorial sea, which would probably limit what's likely to come in, but it's something to think about.
Just wanted to ask the question.
Yeah.
Yep. So did we get an answer?
No, we didn't. I'm going to
Okay.
try again, another phone number.
Okay.
Not very good luck. I will try.
I'd like to maybe pose another question, kind of related to money coming in and money going out.
I'm going to go try again.
There's nothing that I read in here that limits who can receive the money from the trust. The reason I say that is that it seemed to me, in thinking back 5 years ago, there was conversation about whether or not this trust would exist primarily for state
Agencies.
and agency support, or if it would be a multi-client trust. There's nothing limiting here, but I think it would be a good conversation to have early on. We want to clarify what the intent is, because most of the conversation that I'm hearing is very agency specific.
Yeah, and I think, that if you look at Section 2, there's sort of some criteria within there that'll help with that. But I think when we do rulemaking for the grant program, that's one of the things we're going to have to decide in terms of who's eligible to apply.
Okay. That's not something that would be part of bylaws. That'd be too specific.
Yeah, I
for
think you
bylaws.
don't want, bylaws is how we're going to operate
Really
as a
broad.
group, sort of the governance document. When we get into deciding on a grant program, I think you're going to have to go through rulemaking and take public comment and do all of that. And so,
That's when you really need to have staff,
yeah,
because rulemaking takes time,
yeah,
and sitting in places and getting public testimony.
yes. And you have to follow the law, and there are timelines you have to meet and all of
Yep.
that. So it's pretty prescribed. But I agree, we have to have that discussion.
Okay.
And I think when we were discussing 5 years ago, and I didn't make it all the meetings, I was delegated all those wonderful people. We talked about a lot of different organizations that could get grants. Like all the universities, the state agencies, but I don't know if we talked about private enterprise.
Like nonprofits or
Right.
yeah.
I don't know if we talked about that much, but
Yeah.
if they
There was some discussion.
Okay.
There was nothing specific that came
Right.
out of the recommendations to my recollection, but there were just very differing opinions. We
That's
had
true.
this task force of,
Yep.
gosh, it's like 15 people at a typical meeting, and different people had different expectations
Yep.
of what the trust would be,
Used
who
for.
the client is
Right.
for the trust. And so
Right.
I don't think we want to get into that conversation today, but I
Right.
think that's definitely an important one to have.
And you may think about it in phases for your first 3 years. You'll just focus on this with the idea that you may expand over time. I was just curious about Christina's point about meeting, how often you might want to meet, which again can be by phone as well.
So it seems to me that we're headed into the holiday period now. So the next likely time we're going to meet is January. We want to get one more meeting in before we might
come to
do
a
something to
commission.
the legislature.
And could Compass have something ready in a
Yeah.
shorter period of time? What's their
Given the
time?
holiday schedule
Right,
and that
exactly.
the universities are closed and that sort of thing, so we
Yeah.
probably ought to check with them about.
I talked to them about that. They were concerned that they might need to do something within a month. And I
Yeah,
said, no,
okay,
that wouldn't
okay,
be the
yeah,
case. I
all
said,
right.
I would think after the first of the year, and they said
Right.
they
Yeah.
could do that.
So if we looked at doing something in the middle of January.
They did in January, it'd be great.
Yeah.
That would be great.
And we start getting close to the end of January, I'm pretty much living here, so it would be easier for me.
Yeah.
And so by that January time, we should know for sure the answer, if we don't get it today, with respect to rules and bylaws.
Yeah, and if the answer is that we don't need to do rulemaking for bylaws, I'm happy to take a stab at
That would
drafting
be great.
bylaws.
That's what I wanted to
yeah.
That would be great.
do this.
No.
Hopefully he says yes.
Yeah.
That's great. That's really helpful.
So discussion, hopefully discussion of bylaws, presentation,
Compass.
organized by Compass,
Yeah.
based on the
Feedback from a
guidance
few
that we
people.
provided.
Yeah.
And I would say, does everybody want to do feedback from Compass with regard to their draft, or do we want a couple people that they work with more directly and not worry about the rest of us? What's
I'd
the
like to see it in
Okay.
advance.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I'd like to see it in advance.
Okay, so, and my thought was, again, I was going to try to capture the conversation, put it together, send it to all of the members.
Right.
I'm sorry, I was pointing at the voting, but you
Right.
and Representative Conberg, and then, and once it gets everybody's blessing, then send it to Compass,
Compass.
and they can
Yeah,
have
good.
it, they can then communicate through Chris and Sabrina
And-
to you all.
Who's the House member? Is it Lou?
Conberg.
Conberg, that's right.
Yeah.
I was with him last night. He must not have.
Yeah, he
You had a conflict today.
Oh, that's right. We talked. Yeah, we were in every place together the last couple of days, but okay, good.
So there's a couple of other topics here,
Right.
organizing activities. There's been some discussion of funding issues. Is there, do you all want to share any additional thoughts about?
No, my only one that I have thought about a lot is making connections with my tribes and doing some other kinds of things to engage some other people in this whole idea who have resources and do care about this place.
Senator
The
Johnson?
fishermen have also talked about, Terry Hudson brings it up all the time. He says whenever he doesn't think the Fish and Wildlife use the money that they get from the commercial fishing tax, he thinks this would be the place to send it. So and I know he talks to you guys all the time anyway, once in a while. But there may be some of those kinds of things that we look at that if this starts to be viable, that becomes a regular source of income. And we need to look at if there's a direct relationship between them, if there's other kinds of things, we need to look at that and see over time. I don't think there's a realistic one at this time. And I know that we're having a conversation, in fact I'm engaged in that with regard to other resources for fish and wildlife other than hunting and fishing licenses. Where are the other people who use those services that we provide through them? Why are they not having some opportunity to pay into that as well? I know there's a task force working on that. And I was asked to consider being on that task force because one of the senators didn't want to be on that task force, who is, and I've talked to him. That was true. He could just as soon he was not. So I will talk to the Senate President in about an hour and a half to see if he wants to put me on that one too.
Oh, that would be nice.
Yeah, I think I've worked on that issue for a long time. I really do care about it. So.
And on the tribal issue, Gabrielle and I just last Friday met with Oregon's coastal tribes through the auspices of the National Ocean Council and the regional planning bodies, and there's a strong interest in coalescing beyond just regional planning into getting at some of these issues. Certainly, you've spoken earlier, Arnie, about engaging them. I think there's a strong interest in that, not a lot of resources, but it's something this group will have to think about because it is, support at the at the policy level.
Although the tribes can access Bureau of Indian Affairs funding to do some of this work. And with some support, I think they could bring some of the resources to the
Or at least their involvement in
yes,
helping, maybe not the research itself, but at least engagement. So.
Because they do get special dispensation with respect to gathering and hunting on that area through you guys, right?
They do get, not through sovereignty rights, but through privilege, although they wouldn't use that term with them.
No, I agree.
They're negotiated agreements that meet their subsistence and ceremonial needs.
Right.
But they actually, from a treaty basis, like the Columbia River tribes, very weak.
Yeah, that's why I knew that to be the case. But I knew we had done something.
Absolutely, and we continue to do that. It's moving along. It's been shellfish, estuarine shellfish focused. We've purposely stayed away from marine Dungeness and the sort of things they have up in Washington.
Right. Yeah, no kidding. And plants and other things, I guess, the gathering.
And elk, terrestrial stuff, but in this context, it would be more of maybe somewhat under dispute, but we don't have strong mariner tribes like Washington has. It's mainly because of our coast line is so dramatic. But there's a strong interest in marine conservation and eventually, management input. So anyway, that's just a follow up on that.
And on another relevant point, later this month, the Oregon Shellfish Task Force that Representative McEwen's legislation established is going to be meeting, and that just to flag that as another interest that the legislature has, that the Coastal Caucus has in particular, and that's going to be another body that's going to be looking at the role of both mariculture and native shellfish and what's needed to support recreational and commercial harvesting.
And I want to agree that's back to Washington commercial blue ducking is pretty good business.
And just I'd also offer up just a sense of urgency relative to the environmental conditions we've been dealt. If you do choose to pursue funding and building programs to learn more about the kind of changing oceanographic sort of conditions, now's the real time to put an exclamation point on that. We're heading into a really strong El Nino. We still have the warm, Blobzilla still there, and so these are issues that potential funding entities as well as the politics are really sensitive to right now. So now's the time to make hay on that front.
So just a time check, you have while Chris is out trying to quick legal help. You have 45 minutes left. We haven't adhered to the times in this very closely. You haven't had a break. Do you want to have a break and take some public comment, which we have the folks in the room, including the agency folks? There's been nice participation, but I think a couple of folks have come to share some thoughts, and maybe the agency folks as well. Does that sound like something you want to do?
Yeah, I'll offer public comment.
Okay.
Break. I don't know. We had 11 hours of Wolf with only like 2 breaks. This is nothing. What, a 3-hour meeting? Come on.
Okay.
This is. I'm fine.
I've got a half an hour until I have to feed my meter, so I'm okay.
You're in a 5-minute break. Excuse me.
So why don't we take a 5-minute break in case people need to run to the bathroom? Come back.
Good.
So session at surf at 1 o'clock. She's over the
surf. What was it? The front or back end of the.
Who's going to be responsible for scheduling?
There was where I went to Pacific City. I was
so people would reach out.
12-foot swells. No wind.
in Salem. That, I think that might work for folks.
Too big for
It was too big.
I know,
Oh my God, there was some guys.
there were some guys out there.
Way,
One
way
was-
above.
Yeah,
Reason I brought it up is
but I
I'm
spoke
gonna be
to
in
him, I was out launching the boat when it first started out around, one of these
Yeah, a little bit.
just got slammed into the car. Gary just went on ran after him.
Oh, yeah.
Really good. Plus, brand new, they're showing it online.
Hydraulics are just too great.
No, it's just busted that in half. I was like, yeah, that's what it was like. It was like, just putting out there and just what you're doing happens.
Well, there was there were, you know, it all depends on what the tides have, but there was the way it is dramatic and break, but still a big as a swell that you could ride. It just didn't rear up and crash.
Yeah, no,
And that was the outfit. And they were,
But I think it's going to be really good.
they were just, I mean, it looked like
Yeah,
Hawaii-esque sort of footage.
Work that we did.
But then you had
A
to
lot
go
of
through
this
that.
was.
Yeah, it was-
Yeah, I just don't want to leave it.
Okay.
Were they towing it or?
This down for another
No,
five
it was
years.
Scotland. It was a-
They, yeah, but it was, there was one guy trying to get out.
Operated by consensus, and there was one abstention on the
Like, I
recommendation.
was out Tuesday morning and it was,
Trying to remember
the
who
morning show
that
was a
was.
little
Yeah,
lost.
okay.
I know I had reservations about it. I was like, we're just
And
going
the
to
guys are
get
trying to
down
demonstrate
another
out
huge
20-minute
framework.
deal.
Get the smartest people in the room, get these questions, and get out there and start doing it.
So you went right along with it.
Oh,
It's funny, I knew it, just pounded that.
No. Commercially fished in the 70s and 80s and sold as food in 1901 too.
In between the sets.
The higher fishers program for the
So,
The fishermen who were.
and then you had to have
Yeah, jobs in the woods.
before the tide kind of washed
And
it
then got hired by Chief.
down. Just felt when you kept it big by
Sort of transition to
Were the people surfing on my side too?
Yeah, there's this one guy who's riding a stand-up paddleboard, 7'2", stand-up paddleboard. 7'2". I had
Probably just was.
No, 28. Which one? Yeah, 28, 7'2". I had a police drum, so you know, one right now. But he was catching a couple of, whales. And just, winding up to American sword riding before you went out. I got two of them. It's so funny. He's sitting on the stair alone. I was like,
And I go, usually
It lies beneath.
there are like 400 yards out, and the other 3 guys went over way down the gas chamber, and they were kind of inside. So it's just like,
I told you to go.
It would be great.
You know, Marty.
Do you have time?
Yeah, I do. And I'm on the board of the Mackenzie River Trust, and I'm also a volunteer, and I'm on
His
the
bucket was out. Just
I would really like to.
sitting there with a bunch of birds. You know, the smoke going away.
Yes. Yeah.
They're all over the place.
I think it would be great, because I think if the
Swell came up and that.
That was fun.
But it's
Like one of them, I think,
Francisco now.
I've called.
Because there is no.
Oh,
there's not?
He's
I mean, Matt Ford says he'll be in at 1.
Wow. Yes.
Then one would be
Take a 5. Take a 5.
Interesting.
Yeah, because there was nobody.
She finally grown and it was somewhere where
Let's go.
I haven't got an answer.
Okay, that's fine.
You are. And then we'll decide if we need to adopt the rule? Okay.
So did we get the answer we wanted?
No, we didn't get an answer yet. It's okay.
No problem.
I'll draft them. If we have to do them by rule, we can do them by rule.
Okay, that's fair.
That's called Salem,
I am good.
Portland, Eugene.
Who's the landlord attorney?
Not before.
Who?
Great people.
He used to do
Steve Sanders.
I didn't call Steve Sanders, I called Steve Shipsey. We got a hold of him.
He does the ocean stuff, yeah.
Thank you.
I called Paul Garrett and I got a hold of him.
Whatever.
You guys are busy all behind.
Yeah, that's fine, that's fine. But we should get going here.
Okay.
We have Chris's whistle.
How do we start?
Nothing other than executive director and public comment.
Okay, that's just the deck. So one thing I wanted to broach before the public comment in the last with here, the discussion. I think not possible selection unless you were able to get some legal advice quickly, but the discussion of the executive director role. You know, as we've all been, as I think has been made clear in this discussion, it's going to be really coming from the trust in terms of the next 6 to 9 months at least, moving the ball forward and bringing this entity into creation. So it'd be interesting to hear, I think, for everybody, if there are folks around the table who, by inclination and availability of time, would be willing to take on the role at least for this first phase of the trust.
Can we nominate someone?
You all can.
Sure, go ahead. I'm waiting. We'll take any nominations.
Well, I'd like to nominate Louise.
I second that. I'm shocked.
And should I do a speech on why?
So, is there anyone else who'd like to be nominated? Seeing none, let's close.
Do you
Yes, yeah.
willing to
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Assuming it's not forever.
Yeah.
Interim.
Counting on Senator Rogan to get that money in
I'll
February.
make it recommend that.
Yeah. So we'll work through Louise primarily, but certainly anyone can email questions to me and Sabrina or Foxy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a role of, again, this is, certainly it's in my portfolio, but this is very much a labor of love for me also. So,
the reality is we would not have had this bill if it hadn't been for Gabriella. We were working and trying to find answers and ways to get there and not cost enough money and we talked about this constantly, and it was really a lot of the work that she did that got it to the form that got it passed through the legislature. So you need to acknowledge that too. It has been something that she has worked on. And I've harassed her about getting the people and all that kind of stuff.
She's been harassed by a lot of people about that.
Absolutely.
But she has, we would not be here.
We're here now.
Yes, we are. And look at the...
That's right. And it's a great group of people.
That's great. And a lot of people have commented what a great lineup of people it is. So, but as you said, Senator, it's important to do it right.
Right. That's right. That's absolutely true.
Okay, it looks like we had 2 people sign up for public comment, one of whom had to leave, so... Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The list have been brought in.
So, Bob, you have the floor.
Yeah, sit right over there, Bob.
The chair, yes. I'm not the chair, thank you. Well, thank you. For the record, Bob Bailey, civilian, formerly Ocean Program at Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I've been interested in and participated in the startup of this outfit for a number of years. And I'm very pleased to see it off the ground. I, too, was one of the people that bugged Gabriella periodically about getting this thing going. I hope I didn't wear out my welcome. Maybe she'll start answering my emails again.
We'll do eventually.
Yeah. No, I'm really pleased to see it up and going. Just talking with Laura here a moment ago, that this is the initial phase of the launch, where you're still sort of paddling around trying to see how the boat floats and not bumping into the dock as you're trying to leave. A couple of things. I think that it's important to think about process and structure, even though I know we all want to get to the science. So don't shortchange that, because I think it has everything to do with the long-term institutional stability of this outfit and its credibility. And by that, things like whether it's bylaws or making sure that the processes you set up to engage the various communities of interest, I'm not going to say stakeholders necessarily, but there are communities of interest, make sure that those are there, and that you as I'm sure with this experienced board, that you will be doing that. But I think it's really critical to have a good set of operating principles and be clear about what you're doing and why. That said, I think it's you've got an opportunity to zero in on fairly quickly on some key research needs that can get funded and get results over the short term without having to go through a huge y'all come, what are the research needs of the Oregon Coast type operation. I mean, that would be great, but I think you can set some priorities. That said, I was just saying to Laura, don't expect quick results. It will, if there are projects actually funded and people doing work out in the field within 2 years, you will be doing a good job. It just takes a long time for the funding to flow, for RFPs to get out there, to do the peer review of the proposals, for those researchers then to staff up and get in the field. So having run a 6-year research program myself, it just takes a long time for those wheels to get up and going if you want good science out the other end. It's easy to send somebody out with a bucket and some test tubes, but if it's good science that will be accepted both within the scientific community and in the stakeholder community, it's going to take some time. But I think if you think about where this ship is going to be sailing in 10 years and the kind of institution it will be, I think we're off to a good start here. And I would encourage you two things. One is to think about contracting at some point or some sort of interagency agreement with Oregon Sea Grant to do the actual technical mechanism of grant proposals, shipping them out for peer reviews, scoring the peer reviews, blah, blah, blah. I know that OSU exacts a heavy price for that kind of work, but they've got credibility. They work across all institutions. They fund projects not just at Oregon State, but U of O. They fund people out of state. It's all about the work to be done, and they've got expertise and frankly, a lot of credibility in their process. They've been doing it for years. So instead of inventing and building your own mechanism to do that, I'd encourage you to think about Sea Grant. And the other one is thinking about an executive director and staffing as you get going. You may want to think about contracting that out to some entity that has expertise in that, rather than trying to build in-house staff. It may be more nimble. It may be more cost-effective. I'm not sure, but you might want to think about that. At any rate, I will be following this closely. As several of you know, I've been talking with you about this. I'm going to follow it closely. I may or may not be, 100% involved, but it's something that's near to my heart too, and I want to see it succeed. So, good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, one more thing. Marine Reserve, or the Marine Reserves issue. I think there's a huge opportunity here with Oregon having established a limited network of marine reserves to use those as the basis for the kinds of research that can answer a lot of the needs that I see ODF and W outlining in their nearshore strategy. Now, that's not all about the marine reserves themselves, but those are the fact that those are out there, I think, provides a huge opportunity for this trust to do some good work. Thanks.
Yeah.
So unlike Gabriella, who's starting her cold, I'm at the tail end of mine, and I found I can either talk or breathe, but not both. So I'm going to do my best. Yeah, so I'm Gina Carter, and I am the Oregon Marine and Coast Director for the Nature Conservancy, and that's who I'm here on behalf of today, but I also want to mention some other roles that I play. I am on the executive committee of OPAC, and I serve in one of the conservation seats on OPAC. And as she mentioned, as Gabriella mentioned, we are having a meeting on December 3rd in Tillamook. The agenda is not set yet, but I know for sure that you'll be receiving an invitation to participate and attend and or present at the meeting. So I hope we'll see you there as well. I also am one of the co-chairs of the Oregon Marine Reserve Partnership, and that is a partnership that is working to support the marine reserves and protected areas in Oregon. It's really focused on 3 legs of a stool: scientific research, community engagement, and communications. It's not about pushing for more marine reserves or other protections offshore, but supporting what exists. We have 6 founding member organizations and 20 partners organizations that have signed on supporting us. And what we also try and do on the research side is try and support and supplement what ODFW does. So either bringing more resources or capacity to certain questions. Lisa actually was going, Deborah Kerr was here. She's the coordinator of the Oregon Marine Reserve Partnership. She was going to testify but had to leave to go to Portland to hold a session at SURF, which is the Coastal and Estuarine Research Federation meeting that's having their national meeting here in Portland. So, but she did want me to hand out these packets to you all, which talk about what the Oregon Marine Reserve Partnership is doing. So I'll leave those here for you. The other role that I have is I am a founding member of the Pacific Marine and Estuarine Fish Habitat Partnership, which Christina brought up earlier. It is a partnership that works across the West Coast, focused on the nearshore and estuarine habitats. Their initial focus has really been juvenile fish. And so there's been a lot of great compilation. We've worked with 250 scientists on the West Coast to compile the latest science into a report. It's called the State of Knowledge Report on 15 species and how those species use the estuary habitats as nurseries. So like those kinds of references and reports will be hopefully of interest to you all as you move forward. So now putting back on my official TNC hat, the Nature Conservancy, as you know, is a science-based organization. We're not litigious. We work really, we're known for our collaborations and our science, our maps, and our GIS work. We've participated in the Ocean Science Trust since its creation of the legislation and worked with Senator Roebling closely to get some provisions in there. And so we're very passionate about ocean science, and we are here to support you as you move forward. I have 3 things that I want to offer. Actually, 2 things I want to offer to you as we move forward. One, the Nature Conservancy just hired this summer the California Ocean Science Trust Director. Her name's Skylie McAfee, and she has volunteered to come up here and meet with you all if you'd like, to talk about her lessons that she's learned through her experience leading the California Ocean Science Trust. It is a different model than what we have here, and it actually is a cool name. It's, they call themselves a boundary organization because they're bridging the communications between the academic community and government and the NGOs on all the ocean research needs. But they have a very different structure because they're very well funded and they have a lot of staff. I recognize that that's not a completely similar situation here, but she does have lessons learned and opportunities to share with us. If you're interested in that, we can help make that happen. The other is that I have raised some private funds to support you all. So I have $15,000 in hand to support the Ocean Science Trust getting off the ground. I need to expend those funds by May of 2016. So if there's something we can do in the next 6 months to support you with that money, whether it's hiring a consultant or something like that, to answer questions. I mean, some of the things I heard you talk about today was, and maybe Compass has agreed to do this. I heard Compass was pulling together the panel. I don't know if they're also pulling together all the available reports and doing a summary of them for you. That could be something a consultant could do. A consultant could help you by drafting bylaws and principles or a draft grant program for you to review. They also could look at they could also do research into the foundations. I know that you're interested in targeting the foundations, and each foundation has its own strategic plan and its own grant-making process. So they could maybe do a summary of that. and what that landscape looks like, because I know that, of course, you're going to want to lead with what are Oregon science needs. But if you pick a science needs, which none of the funders are interested in, it would be nice to know that, because then that, there might not be a good marriage there for funding. So, and I'll leave it up to you all to decide how you might want to use those funds, but I'm here to help you develop some sort of plan or way to use those if you'd like. So, and with that, I just want to say congratulations. I'm super glad you're here, and you're filling a really important role for Oregon. So thank you. You're welcome.
And thanks for the resource. That's really nice. And I will tell you that if there is a environmental group that I can get everybody in the legislature at some point to agree with, it's the Nature's Conservancy. There are some I can make sure that there's half of my group who will never agree with, and there's another group that the other half will agree with. But TNC has done some things which have endeared them to Eastern Oregon Republicans, especially with the cooperatives that they've been doing. Southern Oregon people, same work, different kinds of stuff. Bike trails and stuff near and around South Slough Sanctuary that brought in a group of people who are avid users of the facility, but you wouldn't think of as being the typical people who are supporting the kinds of conservation groups. So it's been interesting working, and I have to say that in my legislative time, the group that's been the easiest for me to work with has always been the Nature Conservancy, for a whole lot of reasons, because they don't bring, quote, the baggage that some of the other groups bring to certain people in the legislature. And that's really been a neat thing. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm pleased that there's a little bit of resources. So our executive director. I guess we haven't had the bill yet. Maybe think about how to use some of that to help do some of those things. And they have always stepped up. So in my relationship with them throughout the deal, I get very frustrated with some of the other people who try to bite off more than I think they should chew and create havoc. And TNC has been pretty clear. So if you want to know about forest fires and you want to look at maps,
we got a lot.
they can give you the best ones in the state of Oregon, I think, along with our other people who are working with them. So thanks.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. Appreciate it.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? You heard the discussion about Compass having resources that it can expend to do this service, and it may be administratively. Similarly, if the trust identifies an activity, whether it's putting together a report or something like that, and you get a request from them, is that something that TNC would be willing to manage?
Yeah.
That process rather than giving money to you all, which there's no structure right now to receive funds and expend them and do a public process, but certainly put in a request like that.
Yeah, and that's why I think maybe a consultant might be an easier choice, because you all can decide what you want, but I think that a report maybe from the Conservancy may not be what you want to have starting out. Like, I don't want people to think somehow I'm trying to influence what you're doing unduly. And so it's more about providing the resource and the administrative support to get you, the support that you need, if that makes sense. So that it's your report and not a Nature Conservancy report, if that makes sense.
Well, and I understand your point. I'm just trying to understand between now and May how this body can receive funds or contract to hire its own consultant.
And what I'm saying is I can do it.
You would be willing.
Yeah,
they would be willing. I would do the contract and pay for it, but I don't. But it would.
Consultant's going to be working for us.
Correct. You would oversee the content.
Yeah, and that's what I was hearing. So that makes it clear.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot easier for us.
Yeah.
For right now.
Yeah. So given the timeliness issue in terms of when you have to expend or commit those funds by May.
I need to spend them by May.
So one of the tasks...
And then also the good news is I probably could go back for more. So.
Okay. Yeah, good. All right. So we probably want to spend those dollars wisely to help you.
Yes.
So one of the tasks that you talked about is having a consultant take a look at what private and federal sources, I think, is what we probably want to look at, is what federal and private foundation sources are available that we might tap into, and what those funds could be used for. It sounds like it's something we're going to need at some point.
And usually those don't change
And it's
much
a
over the
fairly
years.
discrete
I
task
mean,
that
when
somebody could do.
foundations stay with something, the bigger ones, for
Right.
a period of time.
Yes.
So it's,
Yeah.
it's information that won't go bad real quickly.
Right.
Yeah. And these are just ideas you all can talk about and let me
Yeah,
know what you want.
Other folks have ideas, but it seems like if we're going to take advantage of this, we probably ought to do it pretty quickly.
So.
Or if Compass needs something done,
That's right.
that may require consulting with somebody.
Yeah, because I think I don't know how much supplementary information they could go through and consolidate. So maybe, I'm just wondering if focusing right now on that funding source question in advance of you all identifying some principles and priorities, I think that is going to help identify which are the likeliest candidates of funders.
Okay.
So at this stage, it may be something that would help you with setting that short list of early priorities and figuring out how, what questions to ask to get some type of report. From this conversation, there have been several existing frameworks and programs that have been identified, and someone just taking the time to sit down. Again, if you had staff here, you could ask a staff person to do that for you, but since you don't, someone would call the agencies, call the people who know about these frameworks and programs that are going on, and put that into a report that's keyed to the trust charge. That seems like that would be.
The Compass letter didn't identify how much resource they have, just that they have resources.
And I would really encourage that whoever would be selected as the consultant to help us would have some already experience with marine and ocean, either funders or science, or really steeped in this, because we don't want somebody just to from scratch. I mean that's
on a learning curve.
on a steep learning curve. Yeah.
And you can have input into who those consultants might be. That's definitely.
Because they're going to be working with us.
Yes.
If I recall there, so again, harkening back to the early days, there was information gathered on, I think a Sea Grant fellow did a very interesting look at how the current money flows from federal to state with some private sources, and so that's there. And was it Tegan Hoffman did a very large report, almost too large, so that would be something that we would want to synthesize, really comprehensive, but those things could be synthesized for us and updated for us to give some resources to potential consultants.
So full disclosure, I was a subcontractor. This is in my
It all comes back in Oregon.
Very incestuous. And that full report is actually available on, they now call themselves Blue Ocean Consulting. Blue Ocean Consulting. And so you can actually find their original report, which really exhaustively analyzed models from around the world that I think is of limited relevance right now.
Probably, but identifies a lot of possible sources within the context of that.
I think that might be some of that gleaning. But I think you all did the work. You took that report and you said, "Wow, that's not something that we want to put out to the entire world, because it would have raised a lot of flags." And you all, then your report, I think, mined that for a lot of relevant stuff from what I recall from that time period. But it's worth going back to look and see. The original one, I can track that down.
So, just we didn't take a vote, so did we, by acclamation, make Louise the...
Do you think you can't...
Can we take a motion? Can we take a vote?
It's in the statute that you shall select one of your members as the executive
That's what I thought.
director. So I don't know if you need to wait for, are we waiting for bylaws for that? Or?
I think that one's something you can do without the bylaws.
Motion and a first, you weren't here, there was a motion and a second.
Okay.
Yeah, there just wasn't a vote.
Right.
So all those in favor? Aye. All right. It's been voted.
And with that, I think it might be nice, I don't know that this motion is appropriate, but I think it can be, if somebody to make a motion to say, while we're moving forward, the TLC offer is here to allow the executive director to enter into an agreement with PLC to provide whatever we think we need to provide. I mean, so that you can move forward with respect to doing that. It won't be spending any of our money, it'll be spending PLC money. But I would rather that we had an authorization from everybody that says, go forth as our executive director to do that. I think that would be good.
So you can make that motion, you just can't vote on it.
Okay, I will make that motion then. I will make that motion and not vote.
I will second it so you don't have to repeat it.
But just to clarify, so what I heard from before though was that everybody wanted to kind of see the ideas, but that maybe you would.
You have the authority to enter into a
work an agreement with TLC. I'd say TLC, tender loving care, but I know it's the other.
Okay. So we had a motion and a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenna. Gina, let's do that after all these years.
So the public folks didn't sign up for public comment. I don't know how that works if you need to, but are you all?
Oh, they all know how to sign up for public comment.
It's the wrong part of the agenda.
Our chance to...
Any comments? Yeah, I think that'd be great.
Well, I would just add to what I had mentioned before, the need, I think, to quickly establish, through some low-hanging fruit, some relevancy to the folks that'll be watching you closely. And so I think that would be something to really key on while you're getting your governance structure set up, is do something tangible that establishes that relevancy that's going to help you in the future. And then the other aspect from my perspective is that in spite of Arnie's big heart and effectiveness, I do not believe that the majority of the financing for this good work is going to come through the state.
Right.
We currently are remarkably investing, a couple $1 million a biennium towards, research on about 10% of the territorial sea through the marine reserves process. Very little other funding through state coffers. We really need to be thinking about broadening that to the other 80 or 75%. And I think in order to generate that, it's going to have to be tied to a story, because you're going to be marketing this as a trust to folks that need to invest in Oregon. And I think that story is something the executive branch and others can help hold together for you in a cohesive way without overdoing it, but just so that you have a basis for going out and chasing dollars to implement. So anything we can do to help with that and streamline those, and also provide the sort of expertise that you need. So
I did it. Thank you.
Anything from you, Dave? Dave's kind of the actual base of the research side. What do you think?
Yeah, no, we're, as everybody's saying here, we're excited about this getting going as well. We were involved, in the task force process, since the beginning, and have spent years thinking about, research needs in the nearshore as connected to very specific, management issues that we deal with as an agency, and have, I think, made some strides toward those, but we fall into that same trap of having a lot more needs than we have money to cover. So, we gladly help with, helping put together what some of those needs are, why certain types of data research are needed, have some pretty specific story, as Ed puts it, about, really connecting the dots between certain types of data gathering being needed and how that directly affects, say, fishery management decisions or those types of things. So we're certainly glad to get involved in helping, provide that information in this process.
I would suggest that you may want to look at, as you go forward and you're looking for some early success, and you're considering the types of grant programs that are out there, especially with the federal government, they're going to set priorities already. They're going to have a very narrow scope on the types of things they're going to be funding in the next year or two through NOAA, let's say. And where you can overlap your priorities with theirs is where you're going to have instant success. So they've already identified some of those in the NOAA programs, and you probably want to have used the money that you have wisely to perhaps target those funds. Because they're kind of specific, and if they overlap with your priorities, then you get yourself an instant winner.
Do you have specific examples you'd like to?
Well, in the climate change area, there's money available, and some of the things that they targeted are sustainability, and that goes towards fisheries and things like that. So, and that may be also very, let's say, politically supportive. So, if you're able to get up and going fast enough, take advantage of those funds and see what you can do.
Well, who at NOAA would we contact about that?
I don't know if there's any specific person. I could probably go back and look that up, but that would be something that perhaps you could have TNC and Compass and others should look at.
So one person who might be able to help with that is Rick Skinrad, who's the chief science officer for NOAA right now. He's back in DC, but he was
did he go back already?
Yeah. Yeah, a couple of years ago, and so I'd be happy to reach out to him and see if he's going to be in Oregon, if he would be willing, or actually, I'm sure we could get him to do a conference call with the trust, and he has a good picture of it, has the pulse of that. Also, the National Ocean Council, certainly Beth Kurtula is the chair, is the director of that, and she is an Alaskan and is very interested in the Pacific and was a legislator for 15 years in the Alaska legislature. I don't know, Senator, if you knew Beth Kurtula in those days.
Thinking I should know, because I'm one of the vice presidents for a group called but there's a group called PENWAR, Pacific Northwest Economic Region. I'm one of the vice presidents for that, and they're made up of the legislative and executive branches, but mostly the executive branch doesn't count. Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho, and BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Northwest Territories, and Yukon. In fact, we're having our winter meeting in Northwest Territories. The same week, this week. I mean, most of the people are already up there, but so it's really kind of an interesting group. And got to know all the Alaska people and the BC people, which has been good to know. And we've been, one of our big highlights has been ocean acidification for that group for the last 5 years. We've been working on ocean acidification and invasive species control, keeping quagga and zebra out of the Pacific Northwest. Our region is the only region in North America that doesn't have them now. And so Eastern Canada does, which is causing them some grief. And it's been interesting to watch. They've got trained dogs in Montana that Alberta uses to sniff for quagga and zebra mussels. And they've been successful even in the night, which we close down all of our stations because you can't see them. They're so small anyway, and it's dark and don't do it. But these dogs have been 100% successful so far in identifying one quagga mussel left on a boat inside of something. So it's been pretty amazing. So there's some interesting things that are going on to try to keep our borders protected.
Lisa DeBacare, who's here, coordinates that. Is someone on the call?
Hello? Did someone just call in?
Somebody hung up.
So there were 2 people. Only when I logged in.
Oh, okay. We don't know who they are, though?
We asked a couple times.
So it's interesting. I mean, and for the first time, we have federal money coming through the EPA energy group to start looking at how do we protect ourselves from getting quagga and zebra mussels. Because they kept saying, well, we want to investigate when they get here. What do we do? And it's a little late then. I mean, especially for our hydroelectric stuff. I mean, irrigation. I've got a irrigation pipe with water's all, zebra, water's all over it at my desk. And there's a lot of issues with regard to those kinds of things. But again, if you can match up the money, because they're going to spend some money on helping us with regard to quag and zebra, we're looking at the Canadian government to do the same, so on the edges.
Can I do next steps?
Yes.
So I just wrote still, I'm going to draft the bylaws. And if anybody on the trust has things that you feel strongly about that need to be in bylaws or shouldn't be in bylaws, let me know.
I will try. I will send you all an email with regards to.
Chris is going to get the legal question resolved. Gabriella and our Sea Grant fellow are going to reach out to Compass.
Yes.
Sort of draft a task order or something for them that captures our discussion. And
Christina's going to look for email domains.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
In the short term, I mean, we have not posted and would not post their personal emails. So I know there is on the website an email for.
There is an email for
trust.
So people can email to, and it goes to Sabrina or Chris or both of you.
Chris and I both have
Okay.
that rights to it, and then we'll just field it out from there.
That's how
Okay,
we
I'll
got
just,
that.
I'll just forward it to you. So in the short term, if you want to, are you comfortable with each other having, well, I guess you're not supposed to be emailing each other, so.
No.
Okay, so I guess you should use that email that's on the website to communicate questions for everybody. That's,
Well, they've been.
We've been emailing
Yeah, they've
to
been
you.
emailing.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. And just in terms of it, so we're going to do a January meeting. Jim said you're going to be out for a block of time in January, so we'll try to avoid that.
Yeah.
So sometime after the 18th.
Yeah.
So I'll do.
Okay.
We'll do a poll for.
Yeah.
You have a preference?
And check with Compass and see if their timeline.
Yes.
gets them.
I had asked them.
Yeah, you have
them.
said the later part is better for them.
Are you based in Portland?
I am, yes.
Keep in mind the space restraints as well. Look at the dates.
In terms of the meeting location, which comes to that, at least for the, eventually it seems like you all are going to want to go out to the coastal
Yes.
areas, but at least in the near term is the next meeting.
I think
back
here is
here.
fine.
Here.
Looks fine for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're visiting the coast, especially the Central Coast, there's a really good restaurant called Local Ocean.
I've been there.
If you've never been there.
So have I.
Okay.
We can all attest to that.
Shameless promotion.
Garlic crab soup.
Your conference is ending now. Please hang up.
2 hours are up.
3 hours. That's good.
And just one little parking tip for around here that Chris did not send out that I know about. So right across the street is the archives building, and in there are about a dozen meters that are state meters. So if you go down to the yellow lot and buy a parking pass for $6, you can park there and not have to plug the meter with quarters that get you about 10 minutes worth of time for each quarter.
Yep.
And it actually ends up being cheaper, and you just put your little thing on your dashboard and you can park it right at the archives building.
Okay, and where's the yellow lot?
3 blocks that way.
It's the gravel lot, right?
The gravel
across
lot,
from
you go in there,
DHS.
there's
Just past the green lot. Yeah, there's a kiosk there, and you just put your credit card in, you get your little
Yeah, but the
thing.
fact that they
Put it
cost so
on.
much here, you can always park right in front of the building if you want to feed the meters. It's almost always open.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
I also have another parking tip.
Oh.
And that is if you want to save money, you can park for free in a couple places on Belmont Street.
That's true.
It's about a, 15-minute walk.
Over by Christos.
Yeah, by Christos. That's where we carpooled, so we left one car there for free and then just plugged the meter here.
Yeah, you can go straight out that way about 4 blocks, and you can park for free anywhere out there. Yeah, as long as you're north of Market Street.
But it's nice to know you're going to go back to Christos. You can have some pizza.
Exactly.
It's a good place to
Do
eat.
you own that one?
No, my staff, that's the only place they'll ever schedule for. So when we have committee meetings or committee dinners, we have it at Christos. I said, last time we went to Christos, I bought headlights for everybody because it's so dark. I So I said, here, we can all look at your menu with it.
But they do have 4-hour and 10-hour meetings in the archive
That's
lot,
true.
so
Yeah.
you can plug for the whole meeting time also.
Okay, so doodle poll for after January 18th in a
This
larger
came out really
room.
nice. I
Yes.
remember when they were developing this campaign, and
Yep.
thought it was pretty cool, but it looks really great.
All right, are we adjourning? I think we're adjourning?
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.